Is understanding the location of everything. A location isn't just about the places. It's also about the journey. The journey of how we got here. The journey of people who strive to make a difference. The journey of understanding our world through the eyes of innovation. At Project Geospatial, our stories are about the journey of where. Come check us out at www.projectgeospatial.com.
Thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank the sponsors and the organizers. And so I work for USGS, as you just heard, and comes under the Department of Interior. The first time I've ever been in this room. It's a cool room. I like this big golden eagle over my head. So I'm going to talk about the raster side of the table. You just heard about through OpenStreetMap, the vector side. I've worked both sides of that table. I used to work for NGA for a number of years. I've been with USGS now for maybe about 7, and I'm the acting director for EROS. That's the Earth Resources Observation and Science Center. In Greek mythology, Eros is known as the god of love and desire, so no connection to Eros. So I'm going to talk about what I'm calling open land imaging for data science. I hope you won't hold it against me for using data science in there. It's the buzzword du jour. Everybody uses it along with AIML. I'll have a few choice words to say about it in a good way in my talk here. But I'd like to commend the open source community for what they've done. So Yogi Berra said that when you get to the fork in the road, take it. And that's what this community has done. They've taken that proverbial fork in the road and they've stuck it in the traditional software acquisition model. And so hats off to this community for doing that. Next slide, please. So EROS is located in Sioux Falls, not Fall. Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The doors opened in 1973. The reason it's in the middle of the country there, it's actually in the middle of corn and soybean crops, and I'm not from there originally. I've been there for the past few years. Was back in the early 70s, this was the site this site was decided to be the ground station, if you will, for the Landsat mission. Landsat 1 launched in 1972. And at that time, we didn't have, big dish antennas all over the planet like we do today. So it was very strategic geographically to have this in the center of the country to ensure maximum coverage for, overpasses and reception. And that's where, of course, it's been ever since. Next. Here you see the founders in effect, they're the founders, you might say, of EROS, DOI Secretary Stuart Udall, who this building is named in honor of, and then USGS Director William Pecora, back in the mid-60s, made a bold proclamation about having a federal civil Earth observing satellite, and it touched off a firestorm. They didn't give any heads up to the administration at the time, the Johnson administration. Touched off a political firestorm. NASA, the DOD, everybody was up in arms that these two gentlemen had the audacity to put out this press release without notifying them. And so EROS originally stood for Earth Resources Observation Satellite. That was going to be the acronym for the first satellite, which later became Landsat 1. But the acronym was repurposed for what has become the center, right? So the S used to stand for science, now it stands for satellite. So, but this was some pretty significant risk-taking back in the mid-60s that these two gentlemen did. Pecora later is known to have said to his wife that he thought he was going to get fired as a result. And rumor has it that Lyndon Johnson never spoke to Stuart Udall after this episode. But this was some serious risk-taking that, we don't necessarily see as much anymore. But that's taking some risk. Next, please. So here is a timeline of the Landsat series of satellites going back to 1972. You can see we're up to Landsat 9 now, just recently launched about a year ago, in September of last year. We still have Landsat 7, 8 operating. 9 was essentially a copy of 8, and I'll show you some of those particulars later. So what's on the I guess the drawing board, if you will, for Landsat Next has been advertised through various requests for information in terms of what the users are looking for. So the spectral and the spatial and temporal resolution will most likely go up or increase for Landsat Next, which will probably become Landsat 10. You can see our 50th anniversary logo there. So, Landsat, it's an amazing story that Landsat still exists after 50 years. I mean, how many government programs can say that? It's practically become, it's an iconic name in the remote sensing community, right? Right up there with Nike and Coca-Cola. It's got that brand recognition, and many folks who started or spent some part of their career dealing with raster data and satellite data cut their teeth with Landsat, right? And it wasn't until 2008 that it became free and open. It was considered a public good, which really changed the landscape for how Landsat gets used, especially the archive. Next, please. So we've done formal valuation studies over the past decade, and you can see in that graphic on the left, to try to get a sense of what the valuation is in terms of US dollars of the Landsat data. And you can see that top graphic, in 2011, the top part of the left graphic, in 2011 it was valued at just over $2 billion, and then in 2017 at $3.5 billion. Now the methods we used to do that valuation study were entirely based on download rates from at that time was mainly from our on-prem servers at Eros. That's changed. The Landsat archive is now in an Amazon Web Services cloud. The users don't know the difference. You go through the usual GUI to get to it. But it also means that the way users interact with the data has changed and will continue to, where we'll see less downloading and more doing your analysis in the cloud. Of course, that's good for the cloud providers, but really we have to look at the way we do interact with large amounts of data going forward and change the way we think of how we do our analysis, right? It's a pretty big, shift, but we're kind of seeing that go on. So the bottom graphic shows you that graph starts at 2008. So prior to 2008, the use of the archive going back to 72 was practically non-existent. It was negligible because the data came at a cost. And just before it went free and open, I think it was about $600 a scene. And you can see the exponential download rate, that ensued with free and open. And we're well over 100 million downloads since then. But as I said, the new model, which, the panel was asked the question about what's going to happen in the next 5 years, I would predict that downloading will become more an activity of last resort, and folks will do their analysis in the cloud, especially if it's over, petabytes of data. On the right, you can see in that pie chart where most of the usage is today, as you might expect, with 30 meters per pixel and 11 bands, spectral bands of data. With 8-day revisit, the sweet spots there, land use, land cover change, and ag forestry, ecosystems, disasters, and so on. So, I purchased a couple of Landsat scenes, I think in 06 it was, and prior to the 2008 policy for free and open, the catchphrase was, especially among academics, was they purchase, they use what they can afford, right? And that's totally changed that mindset of how people interact with Landsat. And now you can literally get the entire archive and do the analysis to your heart's content. By the way, even though I'm the acting director of Eros, I paid $1,200 for a pair of scenes, and nobody's offered to reimburse me for that yet. So I don't think I'll ever see that, but that's okay. Next slide, please. So kind of a busy slide here. This is Eros. These are the four major branches, if you will, of AROS. AROS originally the original intent of AROS was to serve as the processing and distribution hub of the data, right? Since then, it's evolved into essentially an end-to-end, full service capability. So whether you know it or not, USGS is an aerospace agency along with NASA and NOAA. We do have a partnership with NASA, but we own and operate the Landsat missions today and do all the back-end processing and distribution. So just kind of walking through from left to right on this, following the flow of the data, if you will. So we're responsible for new mission development. So we interact with users to find out, where their needs are going to be in the future to develop the next generation systems. And then satellite and ground system operations, like I said, we fly the satellites and we do all of the on-orbit maneuvering, all the downlinking, obviously, and back-end part of it, which is the data center and systems. You can see in that graphic we manage, and this number kind of, fluctuates, but maybe 75 petabytes of data today. It's not just Landsat, it's geospatial data in general. A lot of that is raster data. In fact, Landsat makes up a relatively small part of that total. But as I said earlier, the entire Landsat archive is now in the cloud. And then finally, we do the exploitation part. We have a science, and I said, notice I put in parentheses, open. All the science we do is open. The science and the algorithms are published and even provided to users. So there's the exploitation part of it. So end to end, you can see at the bottom, staffing, we have about 100 federal employees and about 600 contractors. So 80% of the workforce is on-site contracting. And we had an FY22 budget of about $118 million. Next slide. So data science, kind of the big thing over the last 10 years. I think it was a natural evolution of the big data movement, right? That used to be, that everybody used to talk about big data. That was kind of the obligatory thing to have in your slide deck was big data. We're seeing kind of that go away, and I think data science is now the thing to talk about. And AI is the other big thing. We heard that from the panel. There's so many different perceptions on what AI and deep learning is. I mean, there's my manager's perspective, there's Hollywood's perspective, there's my grandmother's perspective, and then there's, the reality of it. So AI is just, the term goes back, decades easily. And machine learning, so oftentimes you hear these coupled AI, ML. Machine learning goes back decades. So what's new? I mean, it's kind of a repackaging of old ideas. So deep learning is really more often than not, what people are talking about when they say AI. So deep learning is based on neural networks, right? Which that goes back to the 1940s. I studied in the 90s. So neural networks kind of went out of fashion several times throughout its history, became a four-letter word. But what turned things around, maybe about 10 years ago, was the use of GPUs, graphical processing units, to drive neural nets. That allowed us to scale out the size of these networks to become deep learning. And their ability to exceed the performance of the traditional, I'll call them, machine learning techniques, which are still in use today. They didn't go underground, but their ability to outperform those was demonstrated. So you've all been using deep learning for at least 10 years if you've got one of these. The speech recognition algorithms using these are based on deep learning neural networks. So more than anything else, deep learning and AI, if you will, and data science is about a data-driven approach to decision-making. It's driving the decisions with more data that we have. Is this the first time we've been able to do this? No. I mean, data-driven methods, again, go way back. Statistical methods, have been around forever. So to me, it's kind of a, again, not to be redundant, but kind of the next evolutionary step of big data, because what's big data? I mean, that's, everything's relative, and I think the same can be said of data science. We've always been doing data science. What's new is the volume of data, and that's going to continue to increase, and the methods by which we're inferring information from that data, which is through deep learning. These days has become, one of the premier ways to do that. Anyway, I can wax philosophical on data science and AI for a while, but that's not what this talk is about. So next slide, please. So here you see a little animation of the orbit and the collection of the data. It's 185 kilometer swath width. This is Landsat 8 and 9, how it works. It's in a nearly polar orbit, and as the Earth rotates, you get your kind of painting effect of the planet. And after about 244 orbits, and every 16 days, you get the entire landmass of the Earth, covered by Landsat. So it's key to understand that Landsat is a global survey mission. It's not a point-and-shoot mission. So you may ask, well, every 16 days, that sounds like it's a pretty coarse sample resolution. And that's true, in a relative sense. This is from one satellite, and again, the mission is global survey. It's 30 meters a pixel. It's not going off nadir, right, to do point and shoot like some other application areas, especially in national security, right? Because it's important to maintain your illumination geometry for purposes of doing analysis through time. It enables the temporal dimension in ways that you can't when you're going off nadir. So Landsat is always looking straight down. That's by design to maintain the illumination geometry. Next, please. So a key part of taking advantage of that illumination geometry is consistent calibration throughout, especially radiometric calibration. So there's geometric calibration, which I think everybody understands. The radiometric part is more about the intensity signal itself. It's standardizing that through time and through different kinds of instrumentations so that you can compare observations as apples to apples and do time series analysis. So what you see, by way of example, on the left here is what's known as the top of atmosphere. This is what the sensor itself in orbit is seeing. The atmosphere hasn't been corrected for in this particular case. It's not always this dramatic. But the image on the right is an atmospherically corrected or surface reflectance. So we're mimicking, if you will, how the surface would reflect or at, basically at ground level. Now, it's not perfect. There are algorithms through which to do this, and the algorithms have been published. Users are free to do that. They'd much rather have the government do the atmospheric correction and use the surface reflectance. It's become the most popular product that we offer now is the surface reflectance product. One more, please. You can see that we also identify the clouds. We offer what's called a QA band, quality assurance. It has metadata about clouds and shadows, cloud shadows, ice snow, that kind of a thing. Again, to relieve the burden from the users from having to do all of this processing. And that's become known as analysis-ready data. Next, please. Little animation here. So the purpose of analysis-ready data, and various people have chosen to define what they mean by analysis-ready data. It depends on what kind of analysis you're doing, what the data is. But the original definition that goes back to maybe 2017 for Landsat, and there was a pivotal paper published on the spec for what we mean by Landsat analysis-ready data, 2017, is being able to stack the data through time, right, so that it is radiometrically consistent and geometrically, of course. We've retiled the product, so there's you don't have to worry about overlap when you get the old way of downloading through scenes. To facilitate time series analysis. That was a fundamental tenet of what Landsat analysis-ready data was supposed to support. Next, please. So here you see a little animation. This is New Cairo. This is east of Cairo, just to see, goes back to 1972, just to show how you can go back in time and visualize these changes that went through pretty quickly there. But the easiest way to visualize change through the archive is to go to Google Earth Engine. They have a free interface that anybody can click on any point on the planet, and it goes through largely Landsat data, and they've included newer data from the Sentinel spacecraft, for example. And it's pretty neat to go and just do a time-lapse visual through, and they start in the mid-'80s, which was with Landsat 4, but essentially 40 years worth of data. However, being a scientist, scientists want to quantify the change, of course. That's how we get the most value of the data. So next, please. So the way we do that, I'll give you an example in this slide here. So we're looking at a piece of a Landsat scene in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Central California. This is surface reflectance data. So that yellow arrow is pointing at one particular pixel there on the mountainside. Okay, so go ahead, click one more time. You're going to see for just this pixel, all of the observations collected from the early 80s, as you see that those observations kind of pop up on that graph below, all the way out to, I think it's going to go up to 2017. And then how we fit those observations, right, with this harmonic model, that sinusoidal shape, right? And so the first thing that's obvious for most people from that sinusoidal shape, it's showing you the seasonal change, right, where the peaks are summer and the troughs are winter. And this is just for one band of data. This is for the shortwave infrared band. So you can see a couple of changes going on from this 32-year segment of spectral temporal, observations. If you click one more, you'll see prior to this fire event in 1988, the land cover type was tree cover. We had a fire event, that particular location. Then we had this grass to tree conversion process go, and you can see that long-term trend. You can see the curve kind of going downwards. That was reflected in the intensity, the signal we were capturing as this downward trend. It was getting darker. And then you see another disruption in 2015 was another fire event, and the process, is likely to continue. So what's different here is we're not just classifying a pixel or pixels at one particular point in time. I think many people are aware of the supervised classification process for doing land cover classification. We're actually classifying the data as a spectral temporal piece of information. So we're classifying these time segments to a particular land cover type because there is change going on. There's seasonal change going on, right? But it's important to account for that in order to detect disturbances in long-term trends. And that's really the future of where we're going with land imaging. And so the reason it's important to be able to monitor and understand where these changes occur in time is so that we can understand why the change occurred in the first place. Once we understand that, we're in a much better position to develop models for predicting future land change. And so this method that I'm sharing here with you does this for every pixel, for every band, except for the thermal bands in Landsat, and we've created this change information for the users, for the entire U.S. Still working on Alaska. Next, please. So once you fit a math model to the observations, as we just saw, then you can throw out the observations and use the math model to essentially predict or synthesize reflectance data anywhere in time where the archive, where the images were taken. So here you see by way of example. See on the left, Landsat 7 was a June 13 collection in 2007. It was observed, and Landsat 7, some of you may know, has this scanline corrector artifact. It's got that Venetian blind effect of missing data. Seen on the right is completely synthesized. Every pixel in there is from that math model fit for all of the bands. Next, please. Same idea here with cloud coverage for this September 14, 2009 scene. And then the synthesized version. So the power of this is to be able to create a land cover map at any point in time through the archive, as you see in the bottom right. Okay. So while this is interpolated data, in effect it's temporally interpolated, there is still a significant amount of value for many users to be able to go back in time and create these kinds of land cover maps based on the synthetic data. Next, please. Here's another way to convey the change through time. Here you see it as a heat map over the continental U.S., where the brighter, yellow into the reds represent more change over 85 to 2017, that 32-year stretch that this graphic represents. And the blue and dark blue is kind of where you had less change. You certainly had change, but where you had relatively less change. And again, it's about understanding why. What was the causation? And so where you do have a lot of reds here, it's often due to various farming practices or drought or flood or fire that are the cause of change. So you see the name at the top is Land Change Monitoring, Assessment, and Projection. That's the new initiative that we've been pursuing for several years. LCMAP is the acronym there. So we've demonstrated the monitoring part, as I've pretty much shown you. The assessment is that understanding of causation of change. And then the projection is where we want to get to, right? So this is data science in action. It doesn't have to use deep learning. It doesn't have to use a certain amount of data. This is what we mean by data science as far as I'm concerned. Next, please. So a way to visualize that change, the thematic cover, or the thematic product, here you see North Cove, Washington. You can see, this is thematic data now, right? This is land cover classes. You can see from the mid-'80s to 2015, in this case, the coastal erosion going on, right? And it's quantifiable because this is land cover pixels. These are not just intensity pixels. Next, please. And again, once we understand that causation, we're able to develop models for projecting into the future. Here you can see, and this is still, in its infancy of development, region of Lubbock, Texas here. The particular model that's being used in this scenario, this climate input, there's socioeconomic data going into this, it goes out to the year 2100, right? But what's most dramatic is that color purple, which is cotton. And because this region sits atop the Ogallala Aquifer, right, the farming community in this area has relied pretty heavily on groundwater for irrigation. Cotton is very dependent on that kind of irrigation. As the Ogallala Aquifer is depleted over time, and there's a certain model that predicts what that rate will be, then we expect the conversion of cotton over to crops that are less dependent on being irrigated from the Ogallala. So it's this kind of scenario projection that is intended from this research, right? So imagine as a land manager, wanting to kind of look at a variety of scenarios of what may happen, how land may change within your region from a planning perspective, either to mitigate or to take advantage of potential change, right? So we're doing this on a very limited basis right now. There's certainly, all land managers, want to have this kind of a capability. And being able to project, maybe not out to the end of the century, but seasonally is really where the sweet spot is, and I think that should be the objective for our community going forward. Next, please. So this idea of change monitoring through time, right, is now being applied globally. So at the USGS Aeros, we've done it. We offer it now as a free and open product to the community. But the idea is being experimented with on a global scale by Boston University. Here you can see an example of that. You can see that yellow crosshair in South Africa, and you can see that harmonic fit model I showed you before, now for that particular pixel in South Africa. So this is available on Earth Engine Apps Experimental. It's a great platform where developers can go and experiment. Yes, it's a Google platform, but it is free and open for users to visualize and contribute, to this kind of capability. But I have no doubt that this kind of a capability is going to go global. It's only a matter of time. But of course, we're going to need the compute resources to support it, and I think we'll get there. Next, please. So here you see a linking of the LCMAP idea that I was just sharing with you with the climate side of things. This is the Lucas model, which stands for Land Use and Carbon Scenario Simulator. On the left, you see within the Mount St. Helens region, the forest cutting and regeneration process through time. This goes from the mid-'80s to about 2015. You can draw the correlation or see the correlation with carbon stocks or carbon sequestration within the trees on the right. And as the tree cutting and harvesting manifests through time on the left, you can see the carbon sequestration is highest in the yellow and lowest in the blue. You can see that go blue, right? In other words, we're losing our capacity to do carbon sequestration through forest in this case. So there's that link between land and climate. Of course, we all know that there are linkages that exist. Here's a way to demonstrate that and to try to glean information from how they're connected. Next, please. This is the kind of the new and planned imaging satellite architecture, going out for the next decade. Maybe hard to see, but that outer arc represents, years going out to 2032. You can see a number of satellite systems here being planned, and this is mainly from government agencies, both here and abroad, with the exception of one commercial. If you go next, please. You can see Landsat 9 was launched a year ago, and Landsat Next planned for the end of later in the decade. That can there's some slop in there, plus or minus, probably plus. Next, and you can see the Sentinel satellites 2C and 2D, 2A and B were already launched in the last decade, but we rely heavily on those as a virtual constellation to make up a virtual constellation with Landsat because they're very similar in their collection characteristics, and I'll show you that next. Here are the spectral characteristics of consideration for sensor harmonization, right? So here you see the spectral band passes for Landsat 8 and 9 across the visible, near-infrared, shortwave, and thermal, right? So this is science data. This isn't just, these aren't pictures, and this demonstrates that why it's science data, we're looking at different parts of the spectrum. It's highly calibrated data. Next, please. Here you see Sentinel-2 data, and you can see its spectral band passes and GSDs are similar to Landsat, not exactly the same. But we can take advantage of that to harmonize, right, and take advantage of multiple platforms to do our land change monitoring. Next, please. These are the hypothetical band passes for Landsat Next. You can see they look similar to Landsat 2. We've got a little more in there in terms of mid-wave and into the near-infrared. But it'll be very similar for the purposes I just mentioned. Next, please. And then finally, we have the commercial industry, mainly in the visible and near-infrared, higher spatial resolution, because that's where the market has been, right? That's probably going to change through time, although high spatial resolution is likely to be, the key part of the commercial market. But being able to harmonize with that is another challenge that we're trying to pursue. Next, please. What I mean by harmonization, one more? Yeah, so harmonization, and again, it's, fusion or interoperability, you've heard these kinds of terms before, but what we mean by harmonization is to harmonize at the observation level, that is at the level of signal intensity. And here you can see, different bands, the red and green are colored red and green, of the different kinds of observations between, in this case, Landsat 8, the hollow squares, and Sentinel-2, the solid circles. And you can see how we're trying to do an apples-to-apples usage of all this data so we can map these or fit these math functions to these observations in a way that I described before. So the goal is to leverage more observations out there through harmonization to do a better job, more accurate job, more rigorous job of fitting math models. Next. So we're seeing one more please. We're seeing more shared space here between what was traditionally national security applications versus federal civil, especially in regards to climate change. Yes, we can say that these days. And the environmental sciences, may be different with the next administration, who knows. But geospatial data science is really where there's a tremendous amount of new shared space between what national security didn't focus as much on and are now seeing it as a national security interest or concern. And so we're taking advantage of opportunities there. One more slide. This is my last slide. Community priorities as I see it for open land imaging going forward. So I talked about the need for analysis-ready data to facilitate time series analysis, right? So we can understand the tech first, understand the causation of change, so we're better able to model future scenarios of land change, and that, at the end of the day, is what land managers want most. Methodologies for harmonizing Earth observations. I just shared with you what harmonization is about. We've demonstrated that with Landsat and Sentinel. There are many more systems and platforms that will be flying in the near future throughout the remainder of this decade that we need to take advantage of through harmonization so we can collectively harness government data. And the last bullet is to get to that, ability to forecast land change to inform decision making, right? It's all about the protection of life, property, which is, what the mission of the Department of Interior is, and our cultural heritage, as are many other government agencies. So at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Thank you very much.
a question for you, if you'd
Okay,
like to.
sure.
So this question we've got here actually might be a good question for a completely separate panel. But yes. So anyway, the question here is: there are a lot of duplication across agencies for geoportals, including the Geo platform, which will be discussed later today. How do you see centralized geoportal for the federal government developing, or will this continue to be somewhat decentralized?
That's actually a great question for David in his role. So, I mean, that's a good point. Some folks have suggested, in terms of consolidation and, be more efficient through the economies of scale. The same thing with the way we distribute satellite data. For example, we've got the 3 major federal civil agencies, NASA, NOAA, and USGS. It's been suggested, why can't we just combine that? So I think, to a certain extent, it's kind of the way our system of governance does work. I think it does promote a certain level of competition among government agencies in a healthy way. So in Europe, for example, it's somewhat different. It is more socialistic, and you do see more of these grand unified types of architectures in Europe. But it's a fair question. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that that's the optimal way to do it. You would gain economies of scale, but there are other issues that have to do more with, again, just the nature of the way government operates. Todd, or David, I don't know if you want to add to that. But
No, there's so much that we could talk about on this that I think this would be a good panel discussion maybe for next year.
Entrepreneurship is hard. You need teams to get there. And when I joined Arch Grants, I had the opportunity to be a part of a cohort of other founders who are thriving in their own industries, being able to leverage those resources, those connections. We've scaled our business faster than we ever would have.
Arch Grants provides up to $100,000 of equity-free funding.
Capital is important, but also providing infrastructure around supporting small business is critical.
The partners and the opportunities that Arch Grants has been able to provide has been really a game changer for us.
Once you're a part of the Arch Grants network, you're in the spotlight.
Arch Grants equals success. The team here is standing behind you 100%.
At Arch Grants, we fund innovative, diverse, early-stage companies with the potential to scale and make an impact in St. Louis, the country, and the world.
We wanted to have a sustainable business as quickly as possible, and St. Louis valued that in a way that other ecosystems we felt would not.
The St. Louis tech ecosystem is huge, and there are a bunch of opportunities for new and budding startups.
Join the movement. Join us here in St. Louis.
You can apply at Arch Grants.
Well, thank you all. Glad to be here. I wanted to organize this panel because as we spend a lot of time talking about open data and open source software and open solutions, we don't often spend a lot of time talking about all the challenges that we encounter as we do research and development and engineering and analysis to solve some of the hard problems around human security. So we assembled this panel. We have a diverse set of institutions and a diverse set of perspectives to talk about those challenges. I'm Carter Christopher. I lead our Human Dynamics Research and Development section at Oak Ridge, and we spend our days in this fight to publish data, to do research, and to help our federal partners address human security concerns. And so excited to moderate this panel, and I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves briefly. Lisa.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Lisa Colson. I'm with the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service, and so we focus on the rest of the world. I have a geography degree from George Washington University. If anyone else is out there with us, hello. And, and I generally am working on trade and ag maps, a lot of training activities, and moving one of our geospatial applications forward with enhancements for GADIS, and I'll talk about it more later, but that's a bit about me. Daniel?
So hi, I'm Dan Runfola. I'm a professor down at William & Mary. I also moonlight as an evaluator for the United Nations FAO, the Global Environment Facility on climate-related topics, and was a contributing author to the most recent IPCC report. My background is largely in geography, a lot of satellite imagery analysis, and also big data analytics as they interrelate with GIS. Most recently, I founded the data science program down at William & Mary.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Howarth. I'm the current Director of Operations for the Conflict Observatory team at Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab. We're focusing currently on the Ukraine conflict. My previous work has focused, I'm a little bit more of a generalist, so I have mainly specialized on mass atrocity dynamics across various genocides, different war contexts, everything from Sudan, South Sudan, really more broadly across the Horn of Africa, but I've also done previous work on Ukraine and have also done a fair amount, including co-authoring the Signal Code and doing some fair amount of research on the ethics of the use of big data and technology in humanitarian crises and human security threats.
Awesome, thank you. So as a first question to get the conversation going, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give us a brief overview of the types of human security problems you work with or work on in your institution, and how does that work intersect with the open ecosystems we've been talking about today so far? Lisa, you want to go first?
Well, I would imagine what we work on is a little unique in comparison to the other panelists today. So the Foreign Agricultural Service focuses on food security. And as an agency, we touch all of the different elements of food security. But I'm with a group that, have you heard of the 4 pillars of food security? We got availability, access, utilization, and stability. So it's the first pillar, availability, that my group focuses on. That's looking at the supply side of food. And so I'm with the International Production Assessment Division, and we assess crop production, provide monthly estimates of area, yield, and production for all of your major crop-producing countries around the world, focused on grains, oilseeds, and cotton for our group. Other parts of FAS look at other agricultural commodities. We're doing the big traded field crops. So, we've been doing this a long time. I really enjoyed Peter Doucette's presentation. He was talking about the 50 years of Landsat, and one of my colleagues that I was working with, she has since retired, but she used to talk about how they would use punch cards to interpret Landsat imagery. So we've been doing this a long time, and maintaining that consistent reporting on the availability of food is how we hope to help support food security.
One of my PhD advisors in 2008 made us do Landsat analysis with punch cards. It was miserable. I never want to do it again. So when we think about kind of security and the implications, a lot of my background and how that interrelates is with climate security. So that's a very broad definition of human security. When we think about it, that can be anything from resilience, right, ability to bounce back after an event occurs, to sensitivity, right, the likelihood that your livelihood will be vulnerable in the first place. One of the really cool things that I get to do that's probably unique relative to many of you in the audience and also on the stage is I get to see the use of open geospatial data on the front end when we're still talking about basic research problems and really new and innovative approaches to how we can measure different attributes of human security and vulnerability, things that we haven't seen before. We talked a little bit about deep learning and land cover classification, and one of the things that the PhD students joke about in my lab today is how land cover classification is so last decade, right? And now we're looking at what other types of information can we extract from satellite imagery? Can we take advantage of the fact that some schools look rich and some schools look poor to figure out where educated populations are living in countries. We don't have that data, right? There's all sorts of information that we can start to test and do new things with. But the only reason we get to do that is because there's amazing open geospatial data sets that we can use to test all of these different crazy hypotheses. So I'm very excited about kind of the future of being able to measure and map human capacity in ways that we haven't been able to do before.
That's such a good point, and I think one of the things we're excited to see evolving is the increased conversation and new utilization of, say, indigenous practice and incorporating that just even into breaking open concepts of how we tag and classify just space and how we're conceptualizing land and boundaries, which could not be more important when you also apply the geopolitical ramifications of that, especially in a conflict space. So for our part, when we're looking at all of this in a human security and conflict context, we are, the whole premise of the Conflict Observatory and indeed for the Humanitarian Research Lab is to work with open data. So I would say that, if you want to think about the ramifications for all of the different types of applications you all are working on, I sort of represent the sponge. We are trying to soak up everything possible that we can and find an application, a use case, if not today. I mean, I can't tell. If you think that you have a lot of tabs open, boy, howdy, do I. If it's not something that I've used today, it is something that I will bookmark and save and probably use in a year, in 5 years. We never forget. And we want to come back and figure out a collaboration at some point, because there's always a use case whose time is going to come. And we always want to make sure that we figure out how to get that combination of timing and application correct, so that not only can we use the data ethically, but that we can use it in a fit-for-purpose way. There's also, of course, those really important complications. I think you've been talking a lot about OpenStreetMaps, for example, and that has given us a lot of, the OSM has always played a really integral role in humanitarian response with the Hot OSM team. They've also been presented with a lot of challenges in the Ukraine context, but this isn't the first time. We've seen most of these dynamics before just honestly pick any underreported context in sub-Saharan Africa. That's where you would have seen this. So it usually just doesn't get the same level of press attention. So when we are trying to think about how we operate in that way, we're usually thinking about okay, how can we apply all of these different cases, right? The kinds of things that your PhD students are taking on, and give it the urgency of the application with the boundaries of ethical application and some of that pullback of saying okay, we don't need to rush this too fast. We don't want to be, sort of shoving everything forward before it's time. But we do want to make sure that we actually put some reality in this context so that we're not creating applications just for their own sake. I hope that was clear.
Oh, that's great. And I think it's a pretty good segue into the next topic to ask about, which is data availability. And there's no short supply of human security issues domestically, from climate security and increasing severity of natural disasters to conflicts like we're seeing in Ukraine now, or sub-Saharan Africa, as you mentioned. And in these scenarios, time to answers is critical. And geospatial projects are data intensive, and we all know that anytime you start a geospatial project, you're going to spend at least 50%, if not substantially more, just managing and dealing with and making the data work for the questions that you need to ask. So, given that, how have, in your support or execution of projects in support of human security, how have you experienced data availability or been impacted by data availability? And it'd be interesting to hear about, especially in the context of Ukraine, data trust.
In the back, we were actually just digging into this, talking about ACLA data, for example, and this is a really good use case. So As you all know, ACLED really is based off of media, so the trust issue is always based off of that original source. Then you're getting into, first of all, who is the editor on any given story, and then who are the journalists who are reporting it, and ultimately who are the sources that they're relying on. So you're talking about trust at multiple levels. If we could do the level of vetting that we want to do on every piece that we want to do it, you would be vetting and tracking all of those things. You might notice, by the way, that the editor is not listed on all of those. They don't always get a byline. It's not always, super transparent who's covering what. It depends on the media form. Some are, sometimes, if you're doing television, the producers are much more obvious, whereas for print media, not always the case. Magazines actually go through, in some cases, much more rigorous fact-checking than other types of media. Book publishing, for example, notoriously terrible when it comes to fact-checking. Authors have to pay for their own fact-checking or it doesn't get done. Super important to know. Not something that a lot of people necessarily know, and so you're relying on the reputation of an author and of a journalist when you're putting that forward. So you really want to check a lot of the notes carefully. And then, of course, with any given journalist, you have to go through and see what the context is for their sources and figure out not only who the source was, but what the preponderance of sources are. Are they relying predominantly on official sources, or are they actually going into the field and getting firsthand experiential sources? Are they seeing for themselves and also getting firsthand direct accounts of events that occurred? Or are they telling you what the official story is? Those are very different things. So as we break all this down, right, we can't just sort of say, okay, it's in ACLED, check, it's fine. We have to break every single layer down and then go further and then go further. We constantly fantasize about having this down to a level where we would not only be able to track to the level of any individual source so that we could actually see, is one source overly represented across multiple stories? And are we then over-representing that source's influence in our reporting, for example? That would be amazing. I would be shocked if anybody could say that they know that in their overall reporting. But if you look at any of our reports that we've put out, you will see the potential to figure that out is there, if only because the level of citation is obscene. So if anybody wants to help us with that, that'd be great. But we still have a lot of work to do before we can actually figure a lot of these questions out.
Yeah, so this issue of trust for me and our research is a little bit distinct. I'm going to talk a little bit more on the raster side of things, where we really engage with this a lot. How many of you, just to take the question out, have played with deep learning models or fit deep learning, like actually done that stuff? Oh, a lot of you, great. So you're well aware of just how much data, right, is involved. I mean, tremendous amounts of data. If you're doing it with satellite imagery, you're talking about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of labels. As it turns out, those are actually really easy attack vectors for nefarious actors. One can corrupt those giant databases with relative ease, and even sometime on downlinks from satellites, we worry about this corruption. So even when we're looking at satellite imagery, one of the things that we're working on is quite, again, basic research questions, but how do you detect when satellite imagery itself has been corrupted, sometimes by accident, but also potentially due to nefarious actors? And these are the types of questions I think when you're using geospatial data, right? Like when you see a picture on Google Earth, you're not sitting there wondering, oh, is that really a building? Some of my colleagues in this space as well, we've written really cool, they're called generative adversarial models. I don't know if any of you have played with DALL-E and created your own crazy pictures from words. You can do the same thing with an urban area. You can say, make something that looks like Washington, D.C., but there's a building missing, or whatever you want to do. You can generate these things, and they can be completely made up, and you can present them as if they're real. And so how do we detect these types of things? And this is I think this is what concerns me most right now. I think there's a lot of other concerns in the data space for sure, but the raster question is one that I think is pretty new and something that we don't have any tools to detect or deal with.
So you're just deep faking you're just deep faking all of the stuff that I got to work on.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's real concerns, right? If you're trying to establish that there was and this is something we work on in partnership with NGA, with students actually in some cases, which is going to be talked about at the next panel. But was there truly an attack on a mine? Was there truly an attack on a petroleum plant, right? These questions. We can generate satellite images that prove that that happened, but they're completely made up satellite images. And that's not hard for us to do. And that's scary, right? And so how do we mitigate that is a really big question for us right now.
Yeah. Does the building that the witnesses swear is the location where the torture took place, does it actually exist? Yeah, you're buying drinks after.
Now you're making me nervous because we often use satellite imagery to like double check some of our information. Yeah. So taking a step back from this question a little bit, we're an all sources shop. Like we get weather data, we get remote sensing data, we get national statistics from other government agencies. We have staff overseas who are feeding us with information, and we use media sources as well. So we're using a variety of geospatial and non-traditionally geospatial data sets. But when it comes to trusting data, we love redundancy. We love having multiple data sets that give us similar pieces of information, similar attributes, so that we can cross-check the accuracy of the information we're looking at. It's very important to us. But when the conflict in Ukraine began back in March, we were noticing that our WMO station data was no longer reporting. The government agencies were not reporting agricultural data out of the oblasts that were in the conflict zone. So there was some data gaps there. And then the media reports, you were talking about media before, we realized it was not a reliable source of information at the beginning. There was like wild accusations coming out. Some of them were concerns about wheat production, right? And whether or not wheat exports were going to be impacted, just as one small example. And we knew that the wheat was planted months ago, and it was actually harvested in the fall, way before the conflict began. So most of that wheat had already been exported out of the country before the conflict began. So we had to very quickly, and this wasn't me personally, it was my colleague, Kata Magaki. She had to join a lot of additional meetings to talk about kind of the crop seasonality of where the crops are produced and when they're harvested and how frequently they get exported in order to tamper down some of those concerns that were seriously affecting wheat prices, right? So we were very concerned about data availability, but thankfully some of our overseas staff did stay in Ukraine. They continue to report valuable information to us. And so that was crucial for us to be able to continue doing our crop estimates. In addition to that, we partnered with NGA, we gained access to worldview imagery, and we're utilizing that high spatial resolution imagery to answer some very basic questions, but things to help try to dispel some of the rumors, if you will. So we were looking to see if, the wheat that actually went into dormancy when the conflict began, eventually it was emerging up out of the ground in the springtime and got harvested in July, actually. And so, we were double checking, are those fields still good, viable fields, or did they get destroyed in some sort of way? We were looking for that. We were looking for evidence if the farmers had been clearing the land and planting the spring crops, And then more recently, we were looking for evidence of the harvesting of both those winter and spring crops, since that happens more recently. And so, it was incredibly helpful to find this evidence in the satellite imagery that really showed the farmers were still doing their jobs. And some of them were working in areas relatively close to the conflict zone. So I was pretty impressed. And it allowed us to help temper and qualify and quantify exactly, what the crop production is about. Predominantly we were focused on wheat, corn, and sunflower seed.
Thank you. So I'm going to flip it to the other side of the coin now, and especially I'm going to start with you, Lisa. So as a government agency or representative of government agency, you have a lot of considerations over what you are going to share publicly. And so what are those when you think about releasing data into the wild, into the open, the considerations, especially for a situation like Ukraine that you have to go through and evaluate? And then I'd love to hear from the other panelists briefly as well.
Sure. We consume a lot of government and official authoritative data. And I think there's a history to this. The fact that, much of our data comes from NASA, NOAA, USGS, these space agencies, these scientific institutions, they're really good at providing official authoritative data. But somebody like an ag economist has no idea what they're looking at. They barely have any idea how to download the data. So we created a website we call Crop Explorer, and it was a way for us to organize the data by region and routinely, download it from their servers and package it and make it easily accessible. And you can find Crop Explorer even today if you're interested in crop conditions around the world. We just needed to package that data. So we prefer using global data sets from authoritative sources. That definitely makes it easier for us to cross-check a variety of pieces of information. But of course, many of these global data sets are kind of a coarse resolution of information. We have to dive in a little deeper. We gotta find some other local sources of information in order to either fill in data gaps or contextualize the information in greater specificity. And so that's when it gets a little more dicey and a little more complicated because, there's only 12 of us, official government staff in our division, and there's over 200 countries that we report on. So it's a little hard, but definitely it's the cross-checking of data and it's the long time series of data. So USDA has been publishing about trade going back definitely to the 1960s. You can find our database all the way back to the 1960s, but technically even earlier than that. And it's that time series that helps us contextualize kind of are conditions really super bad or just a little bad? Is this the best year ever? We're always looking at that time series to understand, how this year compares to other more recent years. And that gives us perspective. So when it comes with wheat grown out of Ukraine, yes, the coming year is, or the harvest that just happened is much lower than last year. It's about 38% lower. But for corn, it turned out to be, it wasn't the bumper year of the previous year, but it turned out to be kind of average for the last few years. So it's just interesting, you think this war might wipe out all of the supply, but it didn't quite do that. And, thankfully, we have some resources.
So talking about releasing data, obviously for me as an academic, that's different. I wake up one morning, I think, I'm going to release some data, and then I do it, right? I can do whatever I want.
We're not that fast.
Yeah. More practically, though, right? We have really fundamentally different considerations when we think about when we provide open geospatial data to the world. So One of the big projects we operate out of the GeoLab is the geoboundaries.org repository. It's the largest research database of political administrative units in the world. Community sourced, but we also work very closely with the United Nations, World Bank, and a lot of other groups. When we go to release data, because we're academics and we have time to think about silly things, things we are concerned ourselves up are, well, when we represent water bodies, how big does the water body need to be before we dissolve it into the bigger polygon? Do we represent all of the rivers and streams or only terrestrial surfaces, right? These really nitty-gritty details. Things like when we talk about data governance, who is the official representative of a country that we actually trust when they tell us what their counties are or their states are? Because you can even go to Canada and you can ask 2 different government agencies and they will disagree regarding what their counties are, right? I mean, in the United States, we kind of have this centralized. Everyone knows what the state of Virginia is and isn't, for the most part. Georgia and Florida might disagree periodically, but we have pretty clear lines. In much of the developed world, that's not true. And in Africa or South America, it's a complete crapshoot. And so really working through those types of problems are the types of problems we try to resolve on the academic side. Recognizing, right, in the more applied community, there's no way anyone else would ever have the time to answer these types of questions. So we try to focus on answering these more fundamental geospatial data questions, making sure we can get the most accurate data out there for fundamental data building blocks more than anything else.
So I guess there's a couple layers here. When it comes to releasing data, we start from we always have a process that we internally, we kind of run it through a few different screens. The process we refer to just as red teaming. So this is where you've got sort of your A team, your blue team, and your B team, which is red team. Red team has to be composed of individuals who have not been part of the report writing and an analytic process. So they're coming in with very fresh eyes, and they will go through the entire data set and report from top to bottom and see what alternative analyses they can come up with, essentially try to just like poke holes everywhere that they can and figure out if they can derive different conclusions, and most importantly, see if they can pull away from your results findings that would then be counterproductive for civilian protection and human security on the ground. So the other way that I can kind of think of red teaming is, it's putting on your "I'm the worst person in the world" hat for that day, and then seeing what kind of havoc you can wreak with the results that we put together with the best of intentions for civilian protection. So when we do that, and we do that with every single report that we produce, and we do that with every aspect of every piece of data, so every table, all of the data behind those tables, we have to think about how much damage can happen if we release this in this form. Because of that, we will sometimes at fairly late in the hour, right before publishing, we'll have to do things like, with a map, randomize and scramble the location points so that we are, crafting something like a heat map does not make a difference if I can reverse engineer the original points, right? If all I need to do is figure out the radius and then just work my way backwards to the center point, like that is not hard, okay? It doesn't matter how many points there are, doesn't matter if I can only get 75%, that's plenty. Like, I'll take the 25% loss if I can get 75. And that's exactly the thing that we had to do on our crop impact report, was to make sure that we randomized everything. Yeah, you probably would have noticed if you looked at it, be like, I'm pretty sure there aren't, crop production facilities in the middle of the Black Sea. You'd be right. Did we care? No, because we wanted to make sure that we were like, that was essentially also a giveaway to be like, yeah, it's off intentionally. And we weren't, we have the originals that we do produce and share for accountability mechanisms for those who need to know it and need to know it in its most accurate format. But that is not something that everybody needs to have. And it's definitely not something that we want potential perpetrators of war crimes to have. So we sometimes have, and going through a process like that is not necessarily very sophisticated. And we explain what we did. We'll explain the manipulation. Because if we did it halfway decently, it shouldn't matter that we explain how we do it. You still shouldn't be able to reverse engineer back to the original data point. I will say when it comes to thinking also about the kind of original data that we will hold, there's also there's a few things that we also have to keep in mind. There is some data that is too sensitive for us to gather. So we will, at certain times, refuse to collect it or simply just tell people who will offer it to us, please don't, or please go give it to that person or organization over there. They are better equipped to handle it. The fact that we are also funded by the US Department of State makes a difference. So our data is accessible to the US government. That person providing it may not want that to be true forever. They may be okay with that today. Would you want that to be true in 10 or 15 years? Would you want it to be true in 5 years? Think about elections and their impact on the State Department. So you kind of need to walk people through all of that, and that's always the reason why we think so hard and work on the ethics of all of this, because we have to walk people through meaningful consent process, and we're constantly bringing that up with our team. And so, yeah, it's never enough to say, okay, I've got my little checklist to walk through. Like, you have to make it meaningful for every layer, every time.
That's excellent. Thank you for talking through that. So we're pretty much at time, so I'm gonna have one last question for everyone to answer. In the spirit of community and collaboration, what is one group or topic you'd love to connect with somebody later today or at the social on to make this engagement worth its weight in gold? Lisa.
Sure, thank you. For me, it'd be anyone who wants to talk about analysis-ready data. I'm happy to dive into that topic more. Definitely approaching it more from the satellite imagery side of things, but actionable data is very helpful to us. We, as an operational unit, function under very strict and quick time periods.
Workforce development, which is what everyone loves to talk about that over cocktails. We train a lot of the best and the brightest students in the world at William & Mary. It's absolutely a fantastic place to work. And one of the things that I work a lot with NGA, CIA, and DHS is how do we train students to work in a closed environment before they have a security clearance. And it's a really hard challenge, and it's really meaningful now because if you want to have access to high-resolution satellite imagery or a lot of high-resolution data sources, you really need that experience. So I'd be very happy to talk to anyone that wants to talk about some of the ways we've tried to cope with that.
Yeah, I'll echo on actionability and also interoperability. Anybody who wants to geek out with me on taxonomies, categorization, ways of making those things more seamless across more data spaces, let's chat.
Awesome, and I'm gonna make a plug. You've heard a lot about USA Structures today. Our Oak Ridge is the lead organization making that data for FEMA. We're really excited about it, and our lead for that work, Lexi Yang, is here at this event, so would love for you all to connect with her. Also, our lead for the Landscan Open Data Portal, Aaron Myers, is here, so would love to connect you with him to learn about how we're sharing that data as well. So thank you all for your attention, and thank you to the panelists, and look forward to speaking with you all later today.
Hello, can you all hear me okay? It's good? All right. Well, thank you so much. We are the closing panel, and I know it's been a long day, so I'm very excited to moderate this panel on the value of open source software for federal programs. And I'm just going to keep this simple and brief in terms of having everyone give a little introduction. My name is Sophia Bilou. I work at the U.S. Geological Survey as an innovation specialist. Mostly I work on open science, or what I like to call participatory open science innovation. That includes crowdsourcing, citizen science, prize competitions, and I'd like to include that with open source because I think it's a really important area and very excited to have our experts here. So I'll just start along the line with Amanda.
Hello, my name is Amanda Bright. I'm a lead artificial intelligence data scientist, to get all the buzzwords there, into one title. I have been with NGA for 6 years. I specialize in developing workflows using automation to help increase efficiencies and help our mapping missions specifically.
Everyone speak into the mic. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Chris Rasmussen. I'm the creator and founder of the Tearline program. You can actually look at this on your phone right now. It's an effort to create public-facing open source intelligence. It's built from an open source software stack. You can go to tearline.mil and check out the content. We have apps in both the Apple Store and Google Play. So and I've been in the open source intelligence space for about 20 years. That's my specialty. On the open source software side, I helped NGA launch its organizational brand account and GitHub in about 2013. And helped all of the processes from security, intellectual property, end to end to get those repositories to there. And I've stayed in the open source software advisory space. I'll talk to you a little bit more later about the improvements that we've made on the open source software side, but that's my background.
Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Rice. I work at NASA Goddard. I am the Deputy Manager of the ESDIS Science Systems Development Office. The ESDIS Project Office, ESDIS stands for the Earth Science Data and Information System Project Office. We manage 12 ground systems. We ingest, archive, distribute, process Earth science data. And we're one of the largest repositories of Earth science data in the world. Right now, we are in a massive push to get a lot of things transitioned over to the cloud. There's a lot of open software development across our many organizations, and I'll be happy to talk about that a bit more later. Thanks for having me.
Cool. My name is Rory. I work at the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, or USAID. You'll hear both. I'm a GIS analyst there and the activity manager for the Youth Mappers program and a open source evangelist.
Thank you all. So one of the first questions I want to ask you first too, I know you both are at NGA, but what are the main objectives with open source software? Is it to build community? What is the real value and benefits that you have seen based on your activities? Go ahead, Amanda.
So one of the main benefits that I've definitely gotten is, the community across NGA. We have a lot of missions and a lot of data scientists that are doing very different things, and one common language that we have is open source. I specifically, and many are like me, that I grew up learning data science through open source softwares and technologies. We've all tried different things to solve different problems, and so bringing everybody together it definitely brings a lot of camaraderie and a lot of problem solving and creativity.
So back to the founding of the GitHub brand account is the transparency is the key as far as the version control of something that's actually real and tangible. And particularly coming from an intelligence organization, doing that and doing it publicly, open source with a capital O, not internal, small o open source, but the big major licenses, doing it in public and doing it on the biggest stage possible, that helps with setting, I don't like this word, requirements. You can actually see what's going on in a fundamentally very clear way, rather than kind of esoteric business literature language and request for proposal type of language. You can see it in a very practical way. The other side of it as an intelligence organization is it helps kind of de-spookify intelligence. Is if you look at the open sourceization on the open source intelligence side of the commercialization of space, intelligence officers, patent researchers, Capital One researchers, and people that generate content, that kind of knowledge worker does very similar things. And we all kind of need the same type of business functions. So the open source software stuff for me really helped with helping the organization kick into a much more commercialized gear and get out of kind of the secret squirrel world. So it served a coding purpose, but it was also on the transparency part. Yeah, we all need to be here as knowledge workers, and this is just common sense type of stuff that we need, like Capital One needs, or just core, simple, vanilla stuff. And that was really, really helpful.
Do any of you like to also provide some ideas of what are the benefits of open source software?
I will take a step back and say, for us, it's more so building that community. Because out of the community emerges sharing, right? Sometimes we want to skip to sharing first, but if you don't have a community or people don't really know anything about it, it's useless. You can go to Google Play or Apple Store and see tons of free software. Who's using it and why, right? So a lot of times we get the people in the room, the players, the technical people, the software developers, the researchers, the managers, all in the room to develop that community, to develop that trust, to understand the use cases, to understand the business practices. We get everybody in the room and we build community. And part of building community is sometimes breaking down cultural barriers, right? The not built here mentality, right? We don't really know what it is. We know our people, we trust our developers. We know our systems and we know our needs, so we trust what we do better than we trust what the enterprise is doing, right? So getting all those people in the room and really working to break down those cultural barriers in a way that builds a larger community to share lessons learned, to share the different problems that we're dealing with. And then once you do that and you build trust, then you will see open source kind of take off. You don't have to really force it. It kind of just emerges as organically. I don't like those words. Organically, it emerges organically as a result of building that community brick by brick, and not like putting something on. Like, think of you trying to be a content provider on YouTube and just putting a video up on YouTube. Will it go viral? In these days, it's not likely, right? So you really have to work to build your community brick by brick. And then out of that emerges things like adoption of open source software and things like that.
And Rory, I know you use a lot of open source software with the youth mapper, so I'm not sure if you had any points that you
Yeah, just riffing off what Justin was talking about, I kind of feel like working with open source is kind of like doing a company offsite, but way more fun. Instead of doing trust falls and icebreakers and stuff, you're working together with this common purpose, and you're bringing not just people in tech who are doing the coding, the programmers together, but project managers and users all together. And at USAID, we work with a wide swath of partners. We have implementing partners who are actually working on the projects that we design and run. We have the beneficiaries, the people who are benefiting from the projects we're running. And through open source as kind of a tool, not just to develop software, but to bring these people to that table in an organic way, like Justin was talking about, is really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that. I remember when we were talking, you made some good points about access, especially in the developing communities. That's why sometimes it's really valuable to use that kind of software. So what I also want to ask, maybe start with you, Justin, is what strategies do you employ to encourage internal and external teams to use and contribute to open source software?
Okay, so like I mentioned before, we are an organization of about 600 people spread geographically across the United States. We have 12 data centers, if you will, and historically those data centers have their own culture, they have their own mission, they didn't really work together as much. But now as we're moving to the cloud, all the data will be in one place. Why aren't we working together? So we had to work with each one of the data centers to kind of break down cultural barriers. And we did this by taking developers from each one of the centers, if you will, and having them work together on the same team at the enterprise level. So I'm at ESDIS at the enterprise. We manage 12 different data centers. each one of those data centers historically has their own mission, their own objectives, their own user community, their own developers. And we're saying now that we're moving to the cloud, we're going to take some of your developers from your center, and we're going to work together virtually, help create these virtual teams such that you all learn how to work together on hard problems. Because let's be honest, the easy problems have already been solved. So what we're beginning to see now that we have these cross-organizational teams is that it's slowly breaking down those barriers, right? It's like the not built here mentality is slowly eroding. And we begin to see people from different data centers volunteer more and more developers. How can we work together more? How can we bring in external organizations, right? One of the reasons why I'm here today is to help build community, to learn more about what's being done and to partner with other organizations, right? We don't want to do this in a vacuum. We don't want to keep rebuilding the same tools. We want to be able to solve those harder problems. And in order to do that, it takes all of us. It literally takes all of us to solve these problems at the scale we're trying to solve them these days. And so, getting back to the question, it's really working to understand that there are cultural barriers, there are management barriers, there are policy barriers, and working to kind of tear down these things constructively to let the people, let us, everyone know that, listen, we have to change how we've been working. It doesn't work. You hit a wall after a certain point, and that's what we've been doing, kind of cross-pollinating people at the enterprise, and people begin to form new teams and new organizations at the enterprise. So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, you brought up some good points, because one of the things I wrote in my dissertation was looking at, I created an acronym because everyone loves acronyms, but STOP. So the socio-cultural, the technological or technical, organizational, and the policy or politics barriers. And hopefully if we deal with those barriers, we can really do some serious innovation. But thank you for pointing out the various barriers that we need to look into. Rory, what are your thoughts on what strategies do you employ to encourage internal and external?
Yeah, first of all, Justin spot on with a lot of things, but I did find it a little funny that the NASA guy doesn't want to work in a vacuum. Isn't that kind of one of your big spaces? But no.
Not that vacuum.
No, I'm teasing. But yeah, I think to help promote open source within our agencies, you have to be that pushy salesman. That rep doesn't exist, right? And so you have to kind of take that on yourself, but also collaborate with others who have that same passion and interest within your agency and outside your agency. Developing use cases and user stories and success stories and prove that this has happened before. There's nothing better at USAID, where I work, than saying, this has already been done. This other program has already used it. It's been successful. So organizations like the government working group that Maggie mentioned at the first panel, their government working group has been really helpful with that, just connecting with others who've had those success stories and how they've done things. But it is a big challenge, right? I remember a colleague of mine had to write back in the day the whatever form it's called to have QGIS comply with the American with Disabilities Act. There's no one doing that. So trying to find resources and solutions to solve those kind of really technical problems is really important. And so being that pushy salesman, collaborating, and yeah, just finding those who are on the same page.
You know, you bring up a good point, because there's more and more DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives. And I wonder to what extent some of these software programs actually consider different pieces of that with the various kinds of disabilities that are out there. So having it open source maybe enables a little bit more of that possibility. I'm kind of curious. I don't know how much of these software do. I did want to, you know, even though, because we still have a little bit of time, I wanted to ask both of you, since I know you're at NGA and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which tends to be on the intelligence community side and a little bit more internal among some things. So are there certain strategies that you guys employ in engaging with not only internal as well as external? Have there been challenges or tips and tricks that you've noticed in engaging with internal and external teams on open source?
So I can comment a little. we have been able to really encourage open source utilization when working with universities. So we have a lot of academic grants or participation in broader DoD programs where we're working, for a long period of time with college students on a real world problem. And so, they of course use open source software, which really encourages us to kind of be able to contribute back, to really have a full collaboration with these teams, because these students are incredibly creative and they really are able to push the boundaries and think outside the box. And we as NGA get a lot out of these collaborations as much as they do.
As far as, I mentioned that I've been in the open source intelligence space, and there's, of course, cross-pollination between, kind of the flatness and transparency with open source software. But one of the things that was helpful to get people to not be afraid to put software into GitHub came from actually the intelligence side of the house with very practical rules. I ran an effort 5 years before COVID, 100% unclassified telework effort that did nothing classified. It was 100% unclassified, everything. And one of the challenges that we had historically, there had been jokes about it in the open source intel space for a long time, is the agency's interest in X is classified, and the X could have been anything. So I said, well, that's just not true, and everyone knew it wasn't true. So, but how do you come up with practical rules that people remember? People do not remember regulations. They remember stories. And there was 2 questions that came out of this effort called the Pathfinder that helps with, even on the open source software side. And if you look into the Tearline application that I mentioned earlier, you will see this philosophy practiced, to ask these 2 questions on whether it's safe or not. Does the group under study actively hide their behavior? Would they change it knowing that we're watching? And if the answer is no and no, you have a very safe question. So on the open source software side, when you want to contribute back or just put the repository out there, you have to ask, what is fundamentally are we protecting here? And the answer isn't everything because I work at NGA. You have to run it through a more calculus. Is there patentable level things that I should hold to my vest? Or is there truly a security thing that can be used to game the system in a real way? And those rules, and I'll get to the memo part that I wanted to talk about, of how that from the Intel side of the house informs safety to go out in a coding way. And it's all about what to protect and not to protect, and kind of the vanillaization of knowledge workers across the board, and to use that in a very practical, meaningful way.
So I know you kind of just started talking about it. So, one of the questions we had talked about was, why does contributing back to the open source communities help? And how can you do it effectively? So I know, and I had to do it is actually print out the memo. Sorry, my phone was falling. But I wanted to print out this memo that I think it is amazing. So I will just name it Software Development and Open Source Software from the DoD. But I wanted to have you explain a little bit more of why, outside of the open source software and us using this and pushing our government software programs, where 20% of our programs should be open source based on the federal code policy, why is contributing very important as well?
Yeah, so that memo, the story back to the GitHub part, in 2013-14, it was how do we open source repositories within that brand so people can see all of the stuff that was under one brand account. Prior, you had NSA donating things to the certain software foundations. You had repositories that were hanging out there named after the repository, but the breakthrough there was under one brand, right? So that did well. And there's great software that's there. Our people that are the lead developers, Amanda has a repository there. She's interacting, taking the pull requests, and doing the interactive thing. The bigger question was, okay, cool. I feel safe in this branded NGA GitHub space. How do I go to contribute to repositories outside of that without talking to lawyers, talking to public affairs, and kind of that real gatekeeper mentality that people are afraid of? So this memo was drafted internal to the agency to say, again, these very practical questions. What are you protecting? Is it kind of, okay, yeah, that makes sense in 2022 that any organization would be using this kind of software. It's not that big of a deal. The memo basically said, you don't need to go to public affairs. You don't necessarily have to contact an attorney. Inform your supervisor, use common sense, And if it makes sense, go use your real name and ask the community to contribute back. And that was done. So when this DoD heard about this, they were working on this big policy memo from the entire DoD. They took that memo from NGA, and now it is available for all DoD employees. So you are not going to get in trouble by going out and interacting in a mission way, by using common sense and interacting with repositories. Now, this is very DoD, but I do think of a benefit even outside the DoD or IC culture. I think that gatekeeper public affairs mentality exists at a lot of federal agencies. So if you take a look at this memo on the contributing back part, you could say, hey, look, DoD has done this. Why can't we do this as well? So it's not just an esoteric DoD thing. And that was a big victory to do that. And it's a memo, and it has a seal and a signature, and it looks kind of, very DC, like this very cool building. But it's one of those hidden things that has so much empowerment that can not come across in a PDF file. But it was a big deal, and it's kind of a hidden gem, if you will.
And I probably will update the site with some of these resources because I think it's really great. But Amanda, do you have any thoughts on why contributing matters? Why is it so important for open source?
Sure. So, realizing contributing back is sometimes not possible. I think it's kind of our responsibility to do it when we can. And so I've actually, I have a repository on Chris's GitLab page. And, one of the things that I did was, I took the idea of the original SpaceNet metric, right, which was a metric to evaluate automatic feature extraction data. But in my reality, I don't have the luxury of, having a complete reference data set every time, because if I had that, I wouldn't be paying for automatic feature extraction. So I took that data, I took that concept, and I scaled it. I made it work. I took the same concepts, and I just kind of changed the ideas to make it work for what we do have, and I was able to share that back to the community. And it really increases transparency on, so that the community can then see what is important to NGA, how do we look at maps, how do we grade maps, so that way, we can start having a discussion on, is everything right, is everything wrong, and how can we do it better? And so I think that there's been a lot of benefit, and that was a time where, because of Chris's work, it was significantly more easy for me to do that and start those conversations.
So I don't know if Justin or Rory wants to point out anything further about building communities, but yeah, go ahead.
Just kind of responding to some of the things that NGO folks said, it's really awesome to see that you aren't working in that vacuum and leveraging documents and policies that are already out there from other agencies and learning from them and stuff. I think that doesn't happen enough in the federal government, nearly enough. And it's really interesting to hear about NGA's approach to this because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys are kind of the service organization to the rest of the intelligence community and broader federal government where you provide this geospatial analysis and lens to other folks. And so I would imagine open source would play a huge role in helping facilitate those connections a lot easier with all our siloed systems and proprietary software and different servers and yada, yada, yada. If things are operated in an open, kind of compatible way, it would just make your guys' job a lot easier as well. And that's probably an argument you can easily make to your supervisors.
Yes, and then there is on the, everyone knows the open source thing. It doesn't mean, free beer. There's a labor part that's very, very important. So you have a repository, and you'll go, okay, so what language do I have to code in? What skills do I need, particularly as the kind of the debate in open source software and machine learning and artificial intelligence. Okay, there's the repository. There's no way you can replicate it. So just because it's open source doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to replicate it if there's incredible compute resources. But there's the developer side, and that tends to be the technical audience. But it just helps, again, to that cultural piece of just the kind of the less spooky type of assumptions that really help with kind of the GitHub push to put it in a public way.
And, with the policy, there was something that recently from the Crowdsourced Instance Science side, there was a Crowdsourced Instance Science Act, and we've got this policy. However, these activities have been going on for a long time in some federal agencies. There weren't necessarily a need for there are existing authorities that allowed us to do that, but With these kinds of policies, do you feel like it has been really helpful? I know in the federal government it can be a challenge if you don't have something from the top down that's saying it's okay. When there are folks that say, is it okay? Then it creates a challenge. And so have you found, this has been out for about a year, have you found that it's been really helpful in changing? Cultural change is a challenge sometimes. And so I wondered if you've noticed any change.
So I'll use an anecdote from 40 minutes ago. I was talking to Amanda what I was going to talk about, and I told her about this memo. She's like, we can go do that? So it's kind of a sleepy thing that's not known, right? And there are some folks that, hey, is it a binding memo? It's like, okay, you're not going to get in trouble. It's just clear. You're not going to get in trouble to do it. And that's been the challenge, right? Even if you have the citation, well, okay, but what does my boss think? So there's these different layers that need to fall into place. But it definitely helps by having the big overarching document for sure. But again, these things have been going on and building up for a while, particularly with the commercialization of NG's, what historically was a classified space. So the commercialization of space, and then the issue, and then of course what's happening on the ground as well, it is just kind of ratcheted down the level of kind of behind the firewall mentality. So there's been a lot of progress. A good kind of measure is if you had someone that joined the organization in 1984, would they recognize the organization coming in 2022? And I think in many pockets, they would be very surprised on the level of things that are totally different than when, that's a good assumptions check, kind of like the time machine model to help how much things have changed. Still more to go, but I like to use I think that people would be, wow, I didn't know I can do all this and didn't have to go ask permission for it.
Absolutely. Now, earlier you were kind of speaking of space, so I just want to go to you, Justin, from the NASA side. Have you found, I don't know if you're using more open source software versus contributing as well, and given that you're not in the intelligence community side with the NASA, from a NASA agency standpoint, do you find there's been issues, or have you ever thought about contributing back to the open source software community? Is there efforts to do that even within NASA?
Oh, absolutely. So we tend to leverage open source software to build applications that serve our end user community, right? And so these applications we then open source, right? And so one thing, adoption is one thing of open source software, but then committing back to is a completely different thing, right? And each one of these has their own different challenges. When it comes to committing, who has resources, right? Sometimes it's training, right? We have this new cool widget, this new cool tool, but we may have to train your organization how to use it. Do we have resources for that? Does your organization have resources for that? Okay, if you actually use our application, are you just going to do a pull request and branch off from the main base to create your own? So there's a lot of layers to open source software and contributions. So internally, what we try to do within our organization is like I said, we have that federated team, and what we try to do there is we have the developers at the organization working together, and if their data center needs something, they have a different need, then that developer is more aware of what's going on with the enterprise, and before they build something, hey, you're going to use this open source software. You're going to contribute back to this instead of building your own. Now, when it comes to other organizations, for instance, we've partnered with NOAA, we have an MOU, and they are aware of all the things that we're doing. They say, hey, we like your common metadata repository. Can we use it? Like, yeah, we had to train you. And so we have to get that permission. We have to go to our managers and say, hey, we think it's a good value proposition to share this, but also train them how to actually use this, right? And then there's this other thing that kind of comes along with it, especially open source software. There's a lot of, is it documented well, right? When it's internal, like your developers know, like they know, they're further away from it because they've been working with it for so long. Is it well documented? Is it well tested? Is it well supported? These things are very key, especially when you're sharing things externally, right? To keep people from not only just being interested, but using it and using it long term to the point where they want to commit back to it, right? So those are all the things that we're kind of, the challenges that we're kind of tackling at this space. We still have a long ways to go, but I think we've come a long ways in really promoting open source software, getting out into the community, what we do and learning from other people. And if we can't collaborate, meaning that we can't, two different organizations have two different systems, it doesn't really work, the applications don't really work or transfer well. Well, how about this? How can we use open standards? How can we have our systems be interoperable? How about that? So we collaborate with OGC, we go to AGU and all these other conferences, talk to the users themselves. What do you need? We like to geek out on all the technical stuff for data systems, but what do you need? Because if we're building something that you don't want to use, then it doesn't really matter anyways, does it? And so all of those things that we're looking at this open source software from so many different angles and slowly making progress as time goes on.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. So we'll have maybe one last major question for all of you. I'll start with Rory. Does the use of open source software support other agency initiatives? So it's, open source comes up a lot in relation to maybe open data or other collaboration policies, more open, open government has been a major push for quite a few years or a decade now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So at USAID, I think one way to look at it is our kind of core agency systems are largely proprietary, and means there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in the future to try to move into some more open source tools. Where we've really made a lot of progress with is in our programming, when we're using and developing tools in our projects. So we work in education, we work in conflict prevention, food security, healthcare, global health, things like that. And so those projects themselves, they're using amazing tools across the board and developing and contributing back to those tools. It's hard to collect all the stories that have been done. I find new ones every day, but that's where the real opportunity lies within our agency. And so it's supporting that as best we can. And also through open data as well, and making sure that the data we collect for our programming is made available to our implementing partners, as well as our development and humanitarian response partners as well.
Yeah, I definitely think there's been a lot of efforts that cross over based on some common policies in the open whatever space, open blank. So I don't know, from the NASA side, Justin, what have you thought of in terms of other initiatives that have been supported?
So right now, across the Science Mission Directorate, we have something called the Science Policy Directive 41, this SPD 41. And that's essentially saying that, NASA funds a lot of research. Well, if you are a NASA-funded researcher, then the expectation is that the data will be open, the software will be open, and the results of the science will be open as soon as possible, right? So open as possible, closed as necessary. And so we have a new initiative starting next year called Transform to Open Science that we're really marketing and getting out there. That's essentially to increase the awareness of open science and really promote the use of open science, and then broaden the participation to historically underrepresented communities, getting back to the DEIA initiatives, right? And so, again, open data, open science, and really building that community and sharing those results as soon as possible. Because as we know in the academic space, we tend to kind of hoard things together because of, a lot of things are associated with your secret sauce, right? And so we are trying to really change that dynamic a little bit, change that narrative to the point where we're incentivizing you via funds to open this stuff up as soon as possible.
I'm really glad you brought that up because, there was a recent OSTP, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy memo that was put out just August 2022, so very recently, on ensuring free, immediate, and equitable access to federally funded research. So there's definitely been a big push for open science. There's a subcommittee for open science now. So very good point. That is definitely one of the major themes. Roy, you feel like you want to say something, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't think we have as a same level of like policy support for this, but one of the kind of mantras at USAID is do no harm. So in our international development work and our humanitarian response, that's baked into all of our programming. And it might take a little bit of education for contracting officers and project managers who don't have a technology background, but open source is a big part of that. USAID programs can last a couple of years, and then the funding and the activities will dry up. And so if you leave behind a proprietary database that no one can pay for, that data is good as dead. And so one thing that we try to do is to bake kind of these open platforms just because they'll be living long after where our programs have ended, and because of what we've talked about earlier, that sense of community where they can go out and get support readily available from that community around those different tools.
So I don't know if Chris or Amanda, you have any other thoughts based on what the other folks have shared in terms of, how does open source relate to other agency initiatives or policies that you want to comment before I give a final question for you all?
I can just give a quick plug. Doug wasn't able to make it earlier, but GNOME is an NSG Open Mapping Enclave, which is something NGA developed. And it's, it's OSM schema data where, anyone in the entire NSG can contribute or use the data for their missions. And so I think that's a really positive initiative that's really helped us, contribute to other federal agencies' missions.
You mentioned open government, and you used the 10 years was the figure, and I was just thinking about the old, the Gov 2.0 days that kind of dovetailed with the Web 2.0 days, and it's been going on for a while. Two things, and again, I've been in this space for a while, and two kind of counterintuitive things that I've seen that I wanted to share from these type of open communities. One on the crowdsourcing side. So I've done prize competitions. We gave somebody in Iowa $10,000 for solving a technical problem. But what I have seen sometimes with some of these crowdsourcing efforts is kind of Hail Marys, a stump the chump, something that the organization really can't do, so they throw it to the outside expecting a miracle. You can't really put out what you can't reasonably do. So when you're crafting one of these things, it can't be a stump the chump activity or a Hail Mary. It's got to be reasonable when you're doing these crowdsourcing things. Because I've seen some of the requirements when people are writing them, and it's like, can you fly to Neptune? I mean, it's like, if you can't do it, don't ask somebody else on the outside to do it for you.
I don't know, Justin, can we fly to Neptune?
We actually can fly to Neptune.
No, not. I meant more like a Superman way. No, but the other one that was kind of the counterintuitive, and I was a firm believer in this, and it's been kind of the opposite with the open data movement. I remember kind of consulting and working on the data.gov stuff when there was the idea that we were going to put this big repository of all this open data. And it was kind of a snooze fest in the sense that it attracts power users, people that can write code and know what an API is and can code against it. And I was kind of looking at, the report, the unstructured text report. That's going to go away. People are just going to consume data and visualizations and all this stuff. That's not happened. It's gone in the opposite direction. So if you look at trends in data journalism, the same assumptions were made. There's going to be these D3 libraries that are going to replace the newspaper article. There's no evidence to suggest that that's being traded off in any way. Right, so there's the power user, which is important, but they're not enough to make a community. So if you look at Tearline, the design of it, it leads with unstructured text. And at the bottom, there's these data sources that are the structured data. And my time with data.gov, kind of consulting with it, is I did rip off kind of the color codes that data.gov had to tell you what type of data type it was. That was really, really cool. So two things on the open government that I've seen that's kind of counterintuitive from my assumptions in 2009 coming into that Gov 2.0 community.
So as maybe a final question, because I know Eddie's going to really push me off stage very soon so he can speak, I wanted to ask you all, and there's maybe a twist I was thinking of asking. So what is a open source software that you really want people to know about, or that's your go-to? and or that you put on code.gov, because that is something that we all could do in the federal government that we're encouraged to do, at least 20% of our agency's policy or software. So I'll start with you, Rory.
Ooh, okay. My original answer was going to be QGIS, but everyone knows that these days. I think one of the lightning talks I saw earlier, in the code example, they used Postgres SQL, and they used OSM2 pSQL, which is an awesome little extension to just get OSM data into a database. And the queries are a lot more straightforward than like Overpass and stuff like that. And just, I think SQL is a great way, if you don't code, to get into starting to code a little bit.
GDAL is very popular in our community, and what we do is we wrap it around, we use our APIs to wrap it to kind of integrate with our systems. We have some more homebrew applications, open source software applications such as the Common Metadata Repository, meaning that this is what enables a scientist to search all our data holdings, right? The metadata repository. Then we have something called Cumulus, which is our cloud-based ingest and archive system. When they were on premises, everybody had their own ingest archive distribution system. Now it's one Cumulus, that's open source. We have a framework called Harmony, that is our framework for services. Thinking back to on premises, every data center had their own flavor of services, subsetting, reprojection, mosaicing services. Now we just have one platform called Harmony. All these things are open source. You know, come and talk to me afterwards if you want to learn more. Yeah.
I'm going to say Wagtail. Yeah, that's it's a content management open source. It's Python based, and that's what we use as the kind of the back to my point of the if you go to www.tairline.mil, that's what it's built in. That's part of the stack. Is that what you'll see is most people want 2 paragraphs and a pretty picture. That's what the vast majority of people will take. Again, you need the power users, but the elegance of the software, the documentation is good. The community is pretty strong. So it's been really, really helpful of riffing on from a content management perspective, from behind the firewall, from an authorization and authoring perspective, and then the outputs have been elegant.
So I use probably not the same repo twice. So my go-tos are relatively boring with things like GeoPandas, scikit-learn, Shapely. Those are my favorites. I've got a fan in the background. But lots of things have been fun. Things like Pix2Pix for GANs or sort of like GAN-flavored decision trees have been very interesting lately.
So I would say something that I've been using recently is Terria.js. So how many of you have heard of Terria.js? It's a geospatial catalog. So that's been fun to use. What I did want to do in my last couple minutes is, and I know I didn't really introduce this in the beginning, but you'll kind of notice that there's not 6 of us up here. We have one missing person. So Nate France, he would have loved to have been here, but he unfortunately got into a car accident not too long ago and suffered concussions. So he was not able to be here. But I really wanted to end our panel with a promo video of TAC.gov, which is a system that he's been strongly supporting. And I think it just might be a good way to end our session. And what I think he would say is, hey, come and use my open source software that we've helped develop. So TAC being, and this is maybe the cue to the folks if they are still able to play the video. If not, that's okay, but we'll just post it online. Let's see if we get some good high audio on this. Are you able to turn it up? Perfect.
The Tactical Assault Kit has been described as a game changer. As it's known outside of the DoD, the Team Awareness Kit is a movement that has seen the addition of 15 DoD programs and a growing base of over 250,000 users spanning the U.S. military, federal, state, and local government organizations, as well as U.S. partner nations. The technology and open source collaboration powering TAC permits real-time visibility into mission status, coordination of shared resources, and a reduction of fratricide incidents, all while operating on an open source platform to improve integration across civil use, government, and military users. Maintained by the team of dedicated professionals at the U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command, C5ISR, in the TAC Product Center, TAC improves situational awareness across both small and large-scale command and control operations. The TAC solution is truly a fundamental shift from cumbersome radio-based operations, where observer azimuths, paper maps, and signal mirrors can delay reaction times. Improved communication and coordination are critical to saving lives. When seconds are the difference between life and death, TAC is your go-to platform. Come join the movement and see what TAC can do for your organization. Join the 250,000 members, 15-plus DoD programs, and countless first responders, police, and emergency personnel that have improved mission outcomes, reduced cost, and improved operational effectiveness by tapping into the open-source collaborative solution that is TAC. Learn about TAC from the experts in the field. Join the conversation about latest developments and best practices that will help you advance your organization to a well-connected, situationally aware, cost-effective, and mission-focused unit.
So if you didn't hear it, it was Tactical Assault Kit for the military side or Team Awareness Kit on the civilian side. So, but thank you so much.
I took with Team Awareness.
I'm hoping to maybe tap into that and do more of the metaverse open source version of it, because you could tell there was some virtual reality. So thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. And I want to welcome.
Being a woman founder is not easy. And so you have to have a little thicker skin, and you definitely have to have a strong network of people that have had similar experiences to you, because you're not alone.
Arch Grants provides up to $100,000 of equity-free funding. The partners and the opportunities that Arch Grants has been able to provide has been really a game changer for us.
At Arch Grants, we fund innovative, diverse, early-stage companies with the potential to scale and make an impact in St. Louis, the country, and the world.
I truly believe that St. Louis is the place for you to build your company and thrive in any industry that you choose.
And the St. Louis tech ecosystem is huge, and there are a bunch of opportunities for new and budding startups.
The application process is not just a form, it really helps you put your ideas down on paper.
Be a part of the culture that allows innovative entrepreneurs to thrive.
Join us in St. Louis.
Apply today at Arch Grants.
Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to talk about this incredible group about PostGIS for the web, just a few feet away from where I went to college. Next slide. So why open source? You can keep your data in your own hands, not a third party. You can scale within your own needs, not a third party's need. Next slide. So one of the frequent complaints about open source is that the startup costs can be overwhelming. Crunchy supported open source brings the reliability of a supported solution with the flexibility of open source. Next slide. So what are some of the use cases here for PostGIS and the surrounding PostGIS for the web ecosystem? So this ecosystem basically allows you to build out APIs and interactive apps using PostGIS with minimal overhead. Next slide. One of the things that the PostGIS for the web ecosystem does is it lets you build out user-defined functions into your ecosystem. So this democratizes your ability to write API endpoints, increases flexibility within your own team, and exposes data via REST APIs to other microservices. Next slide. One of the really cool tools we have now at Crunchy Data is called PG Podman, where you can run small container apps and microservices within your database without ever actually having to write any code lying on top of your database. Next slide. So here's a demo to, next slide. Here's a demo of a quick API to locate restaurants near a lat long in under 20 lines of code deployed on PG Podman. This is the config to extract all restaurants contained in OSM into PostGIS. Next slide. So this is a UDF to just find restaurants near a lat long. It's really simple PostGIS. I think there's much more complicated examples on the Crunchy blog that you can find pretty much anywhere and build much more complex things out of. Next slide. So one of the coolest parts about PG Podman is that from within Crunchy Bridge, you can run a container microservice from within your database without ever having to set up config file, a server, or anything else. It's easily plug and play. Next slide. You can feel free to check out the API. So here are the 50 nearest Chinese restaurants near my house. Next slide. You can check out the API yourself if you just point your camera at this QR code. It's pretty minimal, but you can plug and play it here. You punch in a lat long, and a search string for whatever you're looking for. And it'll find whatever you're looking for. This is really minimal, but this took about 20 lines of Postgres code. And I think it's a good example as to what microservices you can build with low-code deployments in PostGIS. Next slide. You can also expose this API via REST, so you can integrate it with other microservices and sort of start to build a whole ecosystem out of PostGIS with really minimal code. Next slide. So Crunchy-supported PostGIS reduces startup and management costs. PostGIS has unique capabilities for integrations. Please find Eddie, Adam, Trish, or myself to talk about how we can help your org build out open source solutions with Crunchy-supported PostGIS.
In the geospatial industry, our mission is understanding the location of everything. But location isn't just about the places. It's also about the journey. The journey of how we got here. The journey of people who strive to make a difference. The journey of understanding our world through the eyes of innovation. At Project Geospatial, our stories are about the journey of where. Come check us out at www.projectgeospatial.com.
Before we get started, we had a last minute little change, right? Doug, who's supposed to be here, you can see him on the screen, he had a family emergency, he could not come in. And Jason Kaprowski, on his birthday, decided to jump in 5 minutes ago. He doesn't know any of the questions, so it's gonna be really fun for him. And he's the new NGA OpenStreetMap product manager. So I want to thank you to jumping in the last minute, you know. And happy birthday, by the way. So this is your gift. Get on the panel.
Thank you very much.
So everybody got their mics going? All right. So driving federal collaboration with OpenStreetMap. We got a great panel here for today. So what we're going to do is start off with, we're going to have a nice little conversation. We're going to start off with like 5 questions. We're going to start off with a couple questions and we'll go from there. So first to start introduction, my name is Aaron Kelly. I'm the president of Upslope Advisors. I love OSM. I support the OSM NJ OpenStreetMap team, bringing it out there. And the reason why I love mapping so much and love OpenStreetMap is because I see how these updates affect what people do, right? There's changes coming in OpenStreetMap that you get faster than almost any other source, right? Stuff that's going on in the world. And that's why I love OpenStreetMap, and that's why I'm glad to be moderating this panel.
Hello, everybody. I'm Daryl Dudley. I lead the transportation team of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. I'm involved with the Federal Geographic Data Committee. I co-chair the Geospatial Data Act Working Group, and I chair the Geospatial Transportation Subcommittee. So as theme lead and in those roles, it's my job to optimize the public value of the transportation and geospatial data. And I do that primarily by increasing access, facilitating data integration, trying to find tools that help people better understand the data, make better decisions with it. And we work with OSM, or have started working with OpenStreetMap to kind of figure out how we can partner to build tools and techniques to hopefully leverage their community, because they have such a great community, such a strong user base that really believes into, I'm sorry. Oh, higher. My bad, I'm sorry. Should I start over? So partnering with OSM really allows us hopefully access to their community and a way to increase the data that we can enable.
Hi everyone, I'm Adriana Lard. I'm with the Response Geospatial Office. I'm the crowdsourcing coordinator there. With OpenStreetMaps and open mapping as a whole, we use it more so for validation. We have a lot of decision support tools that go into response and when we activate and things like that. So we use some crowdsourcing partners as well as OpenStreetMaps to validate some of the decision support tools that we have.
There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Kemprowski. I'm with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I'm actually one of the product managers for OpenStreetMaps. I want to start off by saying what an incredible birthday gift this is. I know. Coming, thinking I was going to be in the audience and asked to participate. So this is pretty awesome. So again, Jason Kemprowski, NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So I'm a product manager, and it kind of has like two kind of definitions depending from a government perspective and from a contracting perspective. So specifically for me in my role as a government product manager, I try to keep it real simple in the sense of I'm the broker between mission needs and requirements and how we can make the application better to support our needs. One of the things I absolutely love about OpenStreetMaps is we're able to have all this community-driven and created data for us at our agency to support what we need for our mission. A couple of things that are incredibly powerful is if you're like a data scientist or a developer, there's a lot of neat capabilities within the application that you can use at the UI level when you see it, but the integration capabilities I think are incredibly powerful with other applications that we have, whether it's Map of the World or OpenSphere and such. So just the flexibility to have it integrate with multiple applications, the access to the data, wherever we are at work is pretty neat, pretty impactful, has a lot of value, makes a huge impact to our community.
Fantastic. I feel like I'm at a rock concert. Everybody just needs to move forward a little bit or so far back. My name is Maggie Cawley. I serve as the Executive Director for OpenStreetMap US. And I'm going to take the assumption out of the room here. Can you raise your hand if you've heard of OpenStreetMap? Yes, I love that. That's everyone, I think.
I would hope so.
If you didn't raise your hand, OpenStreetMap is the world's largest crowdsourced database of geospatial information. And if you haven't edited, I encourage you to create an account and get over there and at least maybe go map your high school. But you may know about OpenStreetMap, but I'm not sure a lot of people know that OpenStreetMap US exists. We are a nonprofit, US-based nonprofit, whose mission is to support and grow the OpenStreetMap community in the US through education, tooling, and convening stakeholders, which is really one of the reasons we're up here today. And when I say community, I actually mean, not only those folks out there, the millions of editors contributing data to OpenStreetMap every day, but also those users. At this point in time, there's over 27,000 companies consuming OpenStreetMap data, and that's not including governments across the world. So most of those people don't probably know that they're part of a global community, but part of our role at OpenStreetMap US is to invite them into the room and make sure that they know that this community exists.
Okay, thank you. We'll go into the first question. This is for everybody. How is the use of open mapping, OpenStreetMap, how is it changing at your organization, and what do you contribute to this trend? And the reason why I say that is
since I got into NGA about 2016, and just seeing the use of it over those years and seeing more and more people use it, right? I think it's been a great trend and more people using it for, once it was just a base map and now for other applications. So I can see how it is at NGA a little bit, but for your organizations, how is it changing and what do you contribute to it?
We're just kind of starting on our journey at DOT. We've been working with Maggie and her team for a couple of years now. We really see a tremendous increase in demand for geospatial data, especially with the advent of automated vehicles. We anticipate the demand to be much larger than the resources we have to meet that demand. So expanding opportunities and methods of data collection and sharing is really kind of why we're involved with OpenStreetMap. We're currently developing an open data strategy, open geospatial data strategy at the department. An example that we could use would be our initiative to collect bicycling, pedestrian, and accessibility data. So a lot of that is very, very local, and all the expertise is local. How do we collect that and aggregate it and share it nationally? It creates a lot of challenges. So working with Maggie and OpenStreetMap and open data collection and open data sharing, I think advances us towards that space where we can increase access and integrate the data and start helping people make informed decisions about their travel needs.
Yeah, I think to agree with you on that, I think we're trending with a lot of other federal agencies. We need better ways to leverage it, and I think, with red tape, as you know, with federal agencies, it's kind of fairly new that we've started using some of this open mapping, open street maps, and things like that. I think right now, what I've seen as far as trending is that, like I spoke about before, that validation piece. So one thing I could speak to is we have a tool called POST, and it's a prioritization of operations support tool. And so during a disaster, we'll get a lot of overlays, a lot of different layers, and we'll look at it and we'll try to see where we should send resources and send people, or see where our biggest impacts will be. It's somewhat of impact indexed. And so with that, we'll take a lot of open source or open data, open mapping, and kind of validate those to make sure that we were correct and that it was right, or to make sure that it was in line with what we sent or how much we sent. And that's what I've been seeing lately, as well as we use it in a crowdsourcing. So a lot of times we're not able, with FEMA in response, we're not able to get boots on the ground right away. But if we use that crowdsourcing, use that open source data to kind of look and see where we should respond, or how bad is it. So that's what we use it for a lot. And I see the trend going up as far as the need and the want for open mapping, open data.
Man, how do I follow that? Everything, what I'm hearing right now is exactly what we're impacting our agency. It just gives us the opportunity to take or acquire information that wasn't readily available to us. And it just provides us that data in our organization to support our mission. There was a request that came in last week that kind of demonstrated the power of it. Like, within our organization, we have responsibilities to understand boundaries, right? Daryl was talking about transportation, but specifically for us within boundaries, we're looking at boundaries, whether it's maps or information. But what's pretty neat is, if there's areas that nobody really even knows about, but you have users out there that's kind of saying, hey, this is my village, this is my boundary, we're able to capture that information, whether it's for natural disaster purposes, supporting FEMA, human geography. It's incredible. So it's just having access and available to, like, literally the world contributing to, geospatial data. Another thing that's really impactful to our organization is the flexibility and how it's open and you're able to integrate it with other applications. I mentioned earlier a little bit with Map of the World, OpenSphere. So if we do have a community out there that's not aware of OpenStreetMaps, we can have that embedded within other applications. And you'll see right there OpenStreetMaps. And as Aaron is doing his user engagement efforts in our agency, that's just some of the things that we're educating folks through Discovery Series. Just share the wealth, understand the value, demonstrate the impact, and just let it be contagious.
Are you sure you weren't prepared for this panel? Gosh, I guess bring a different perspective here from the community side, but OpenStreetMap has really reached a level of maturation as a project over the last, almost 20 years. And I think, the private sector has seen its value and, economized on its value for a really long time. There's a lot of applications using OpenStreetMap, and it's free, right? And I think that value is increasingly being realized by our state, local, and federal government agencies because the data is just getting to that level of quality. And, it could take a year to update all of the buildings in, a county government's database, but it could take minutes in OpenStreetMap. So even that timeliness of data and the readiness is something that people are coming to rely upon. I'd say that the other thing is, the value is not only in the map data, but the tooling, the open source software that is being built around OpenStreetMap, I think is also getting more attention in recent years than it has in the past. And the encouraging thing that I see is that there's more collaboration around those tools as more and more people are using them. So I hope it's a trend that continues.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. And now we're going to get into the details. How do you, for your agency, I'll pick on my NGA rep and FEMA rep. How do you guys manage quality, accuracy, and reliability when using open data, open source, open mapping data? And the reason why I say that is because I know at least at NGA that's a question that comes up to us all the time. Like, this is a great data source, but how do you know it's accurate? How do you know that kind of stuff? So how do you deal with those kind of issues?
Great point. I think that is a challenge, right? Yeah. As you mentioned, especially in FEMA, where we have to be accurate. I'm not going to say right, but we have to be accurate in responding, right? So that's been kind of like the biggest challenge that I've seen when we're trying to say, hey, we can leverage this data set, but they're like, I don't see a timestamp, or how do we know that's for this disaster, especially places that get hit more than one time when you get that open source data. So I think it's one way that we manage it is just partnering with the right people, right? Making those right connections, the people that are already validating the data, that are ingesting the data, going through it, making sure that it's correct. I also think that spaces like this, where I can meet people and talk with people and ask questions about the data that they have and kind of get those answers. And so I'm able to give my senior leaders and say, hey, no, this is actually verified by this agency, this many people look at it. And I think in FEMA, we have a few data sets that we use, but a lot of the time it goes out to the regions. So depending on that regional, wherever that disaster happens in that region, they kind of are able to validate their own data, and we'll get it at HQ from a headquarters level and use it there. So I think it's just a thing of working with everybody and making sure we understand the good and bad about every data set and leveraging that.
All right, sir.
So for us at NGA in our profession, right, we're trained since day one that not a single source is going to be the end all, right? So it's a matter of experience, understanding what you're looking at. Most of the times, if we're looking at an area, we're analyzing geospatial data, it's not our first time. So we have really good muscle memory of the areas that we're looking at. And, like my colleague here mentioned for FEMA, it's all about other sources, right? Looking at other collateral sources. So our users in our agency understand that this is data that's derived from open source. It's people from around the world. And as you're looking at areas and all the data, you kind of see patterns and trends, and you kind of see the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what not to use. But regardless, even if it's not what we want it to be at our level, the data is still extremely valuable because it's information we wouldn't have access to prior.
Yeah, thank you for answering that question. Now I'll give you two a break and answer my other two colleagues on the panel. So, what does, for you, Daryl, what does open mapping enable that you have not been able to achieve by other techniques?
That's a good question, and it's a good thing I thought about it before I got up here. We've kind of identified 3 roles at DOT for geospatial data community. One is a data producer, one is a data consumer, and the other is an enabler. So as theme lead, I am an enabler. I'm trying to connect producers with consumers and trying to, again, optimize the public value of that data. Working with Maggie and OpenStreetMap allows us to do that job better. We're better able to connect the consumers of the data with transportation information. It also allows us to hopefully it'll become a two-way street where we're not only consuming the data but also providing data back to OSM. So we're increasing accessibility to the data and helping people make informed decisions about transportation and the work and how they want to get around. So another part of this is access to local knowledge or local expertise. I don't know where the curb cuts are in Des Moines, Iowa, but the Iowans do, or the Des Moines. What are the words for Des Moines? Des Moines. They do. And those questions are essential across the nation. So as we get into the community and start building these partnerships and understanding that we're all in it together, we can start really kind of influencing and helping people make better decisions that make them safer and make transportation more efficient. So the big thing we're focused on is safety. So if we can make somebody's trip safer, that's fantastic. If we can save somebody the trouble of walking an extra block or going to a building where it's accessible and as opposed to where it's not, that's a victory too. So all these small victories accumulate, and we hope to make a difference in people's lives that way.
Okay, and that's actually a good thing you brought up, the local data, the people who are putting the data in there. That's something that people kind of forget about. Like the people who are updating these maps are the people in those areas, right? You could take every agency, but you're not that person in Iowa or wherever making those updates. So I think that's a great point. So Maggie, following up on that, how are you collaborating to support these goals? How are you doing that?
This is a good one. I didn't prepare for this at all. So, OpenStreetMap US is increasingly becoming the convener of all the stakeholders. I mean, if you think about OpenStreetMap and a map, there's so many different things that it touches. It touches our whole world. Everything is geospatial. So what we've started to do is create these convening spaces, especially with the government. We created a government committee 2 years ago. Within the first year of our conversation, it started in 2019 in Minneapolis at the State of the Map US. And, we had a panel, and the questions were, can authoritative data and crowdsourced data live together harmoniously? And this was a big question for an hour panel to tackle. What does interoperability look like? What does a collaboration look like between government and OpenStreetMap? So these were the foundation for our first government committee meeting. And I think we had 15 people at that first meeting in August of 2020, and I was really excited about that. And then I looked at an org chart of the federal government, and it's like, wow, we have a really long way to go to make sure that everybody's voice is in the room. But 2 years later, we have 60 people coming to these meetings on and off, and really starting to grow that. So, I think the value that we're bringing is creating kind of more neutral space to bring all these stakeholders together, private industry, government stakeholders, and the mappers. I mean, so we are bringing, map editors into the room as well to talk about, how we work on metadata. The other thing is finding a shared language. I mean, you talk about government GIS very differently than you talk about OpenStreetMap data, but we all know at the end of the day it's kind of the same thing, but what's a tag? What's an equals what? So providing that translation has been a long conversation, and getting to that shared understanding to support future collaboration has been really, really great, and something that needs to continue.
And I just want to say that, when I joined, there wasn't OpenStreetMap US, right? Like, this is a thing, right? And I think this is one of the cool things that came out of these kind of meetings, just be able to have a panel like this. Because 5 years ago, we're not having this kind of meeting with these three agencies on the same panel talking about OpenStreetMap. And there's not meetings going on, monthly meetings, kind of talk about stuff. And, you're working on an issue, like stuff you have, maybe another agency could help out, and just having those things together. So I think it's good. You want to say?
I just wanted to point out, OpenStreetMap has already been helpful for the federal government. With the Geospatial Data Act, we're required to develop data standards, minimum content data standards, and the OSM community has done a lot of that work already. Those standards must be consensus-based. So having OSM and their community kind of define what's important to them about certain geospatial features is a huge help to us to understand what that content should include. So it saves us the time and effort of convening lots of meetings and talks and stuff like that. So, that's already a way we can partner and avoid the cost of all that stuff. So we're already being successful at
Well, and, I'm not, should I say this in here about the speed of government? But, one of the things we're also finding is, we are a nonprofit organization and we represent the community, but we're also a little more agile. We can try things and fail pretty quickly. Whereas, if you go through different routes of the agencies, they have different requirements. So, being able to partner and, OpenStreetMap US takes that risk. We're going to try to build a tool. If it works, that's great. If not, we iterate and we try again. But we can do that over a year time and continue to work on things in a way that I don't think is as flexible in your all's agencies.
Yeah. Yes. Now let's look to the future. Where are we going to be 5 years from now, from today, with open data, OpenStreetMap, and what will we be talking about at that FedGeoDay 5 years from now? Because, where do you think this is heading? So I'm going to ask all the question to everybody on the panel.
I go first?
Yeah, you're always first.
I'm always first, okay. So 5 years from now, Maggie and I will have won the Nobel Prize, the Pulitzer, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So those are, lofty goals. I champion incrementalism. It's the way the federal government works. We make small adjustments and we advance that way. It's painful sometimes. It seems glacial or geologic, but that's just the way it is. So we have to be committed to the changes that we want to make, and that may take years. So being up here, committing to open data and getting open data into the hands of travelers and the transportation community is where we're headed, and I'm committed to that. I know Maggie is. So 5 years, I see an even stronger partnership with OpenStreetMap, maybe some other dabbles in the open community. Hopefully we will have built a tool that we're working on, a public domain map, which allows the collection and authentication of public domain data, and that data is then consumed by DOT and then OpenStreetMap as well. So developing those tools for collection and authentication and increasing, again, optimizing the value of the public data through access, integration, analyzation, and better decision making is where we're headed. And I'm happy to be up here with everybody. I think we're all committed to the same thing, and we're just, want to make the world a better place, and we can do that.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment as well. I think if you think about FEMA as an agency, if you just look back 5 years first, right, we've made strides, so many strides in crowdsourcing and open mapping. So if I think about the next 5 years, I can just imagine where we're going to be. But it starts, like you said, with the partnerships, with having the conversations, because I feel like there's so much more we can tap into, especially as a response agency for disasters that we don't leverage because, one, we don't know it's there, or two, we're not allowed to use it. So I think that is something that I think in the next 5 years we're going to see that FEMA come with a lot of, using a lot of data sets and ingesting a lot of data that is open that we'll be able to use. I will say that we have created the USA structures, which is building footprints of structures throughout the U.S. And that data set is actually on Living Atlas right now. So I think in the next 5 years, we'll probably build that out a little bit more, add some more attributions, add some more details to it. But that is one of the public, open public domain data sets that we do have at FEMA. So I think in the next 5 years, that's going to be kind of like one of our bread and butter things.
Are you adding addresses to those?
Right now, we have UUID, and I think it should be, I don't want to speak for it, but I think it's definitely coming down the line.
We should partner because we have the address team that we can work with. All right.
See, and that's why we're here. That works out. That works out. But we do have some things we need to add to that. But yeah, I would love to collab. I'm probably not the right person for that, but I definitely think we can do that. So in the next 5 years, I do think FEMA will be one of the agencies, well, I hope will be one of the lead agencies for open source and open mapping.
Right. Sitting here at the last minute, representative as a National Geospatial Agency, that's going to be awesome.
I know. I hope.
Right. That's going to be great. So Maggie asked earlier how many hands were up that was aware of or is a user of OpenStreetMaps. And I'll ask the question to the audience. How many legacy GIS users, like you were doing GIS in the last 10 years, if you raise your hand? All right. So we have some folks here. So where I'm going to get to is what I see in the future is focus on look how GIS community has evolved, right? So I first got into GIS when I enlisted in the Army in 2002, and we were learning ArcView, and what was it? Avenue scripting. And then ArcMap came around, and ArcPro is here, but those are all like desktop applications, right? And they're very powerful, right? But they're very expensive to acquire as well. So also, depends on where you are at the agency level or what you want to do. And then we're moving into web applications, right? So now we have all these geospatial applications in a web environment. So we moved from desktop applications to proprietary databases to now we have an open source community building in a web environment. So I'm fascinated to see where the next 5 years are going to go when we start marrying mapping up along with imagery, right? Because we're just talking about mapping here, and we can use a base map where we take photos and we kind of see what we do, but kind of marry that up with commercial imagery sources. And then in addition to what we're doing with where the world is going with AI, ML, right? Like artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? Whether or not you're in a OpenStreetMaps application and you're constantly, creating a certain kind of features, maybe the system will learn what you're doing and automatically populate that or close those corners based on what they see on the pixels on imagery, right? So from the AI ML perspective, I'm pretty excited to see where that's going to go in the next 5 years.
Crystal ball. Let's see. Well, I mean, in 5 years, hopefully I won't have to do anything about raising your hands because everybody's heard of OpenStreetMap. I know where I'd like to see it. I think right now there's a lot of consumption of the data. And, I really hope we start to think about the tragedy of the commons and start thinking about, if too many people are standing on this table, the legs are going to collapse. So I really like to see more people getting invested in the infrastructure that supports all of these things. I'd like to see, thanks, Eddie. I'd like to see us thinking about education, we have a program we work on with OpenStreetMap US, Teach OSM, trying to bring OpenStreetMap into classrooms to get those teenagers thinking geospatially at a younger age. Thinking about that next generation of folks who are going to be relying on this data and needing these tools, but also probably don't really think that way quite yet. I'd like to see more thinking about getting data out of OpenStreetMap in an accessible way. There are ways now, but I mean, creating greater accessibility allows people to use it, support their missions, whether it's advocating for equity in different neighborhoods based on, the number of playgrounds or, you throw out any kind of case study, the number of bike lane miles in a city. So I'd like to see more of that kind of thing. And I hope that we're talking more about analysis and not as much as completeness. I don't know when the goal was to finish the map, but as we all know, it's probably never done because we need to garden it and things change and the world is ever changing. But yeah, I hope we're still having this conversation and we've solved all the problems of the world.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say, just add on to that, I would love more collaboration, right? Because I think there's some really good information that we all have, right? We all bring to the table. So what, transportation, FEMA, NGA, we all care about different things. If we could start contributing, understanding tagging, getting to the right set of data, and just making the data more complete so we can use it for the analysis. I agree with that. I'm going to go a little bit off script now. Maggie doesn't know what I'm about to do right now. So we're going to ask one more question. We talked about what you did and everything you did, but what do you like about it? Let's go what do you actually like about open mapping, OSM? What do you like about it? Because I know you're using it, you advocate for it, but what do you like about this whole thing?
I'm a geo geek.
All right.
Cartophile. So I love everything geospatial. I love maps. I love charts, nautical charts, aeronautical charts. What I like most about OSM is I feel at home. I feel like you're my people. So I can sit around and chat about geography and space and how it's used and how it creates a better understanding of the world and how we use that knowledge to improve things for people. So the community is really what excites me about OSM. And I feel like we're all kind of in it together. We understand that we're working towards a better understanding of the world and how to interact with it. I'm also very excited about the potential for, how many users do you have? 8 million? There's so much potential there for data collection and sharing. I'm really excited about that. I want to try and leverage that to make, to improve things. So the potential is what really gets me, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think what I like most about just OSM is that their willingness, or the willingness to solve issues and solve problems. I think a lot of times, just at my agency, we have certain things that we need to find out quickly, and we need to get in there with the community, understand the community, especially because these disasters impact the community, and OSM has been great with helping us trying to solve those problems. Maggie and I had a conversation yesterday just about some projects that we're working on, and we were just kind of coming out with ideas of how OSM could be impactful in solving those issues. So I think that's one of the things I like. And like she said, you guys, OSM is allowed to make tools and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then okay. If it does, then yes, we can put this out there to everybody. And I think that's something that FEMA enjoys and that we like. And that's one of the biggest reasons why we're partnering.
All right, it's on. So there's many things I like a lot about OSM. One of the things that got me pretty excited about OSM, OpenStreetMap, was when Aaron and I met and he was, giving me a heads up. He's like, hey, congratulations, you're a product manager of this application. I'm like, sweet, what is it? What does it do? And he just sat down with me. It was just the simplicity of it, right off the bat, being able to have like a google.com/maps, but have something you could contribute back to and have available to us to support our needs. I explained, I was like, man, where was this 10 years ago? As I was an analyst, and I know that there's information over here, but I can't get it over where I need it, to do my job or support the mission or task at hand. So when I saw that we had that available at our fingertips, I was like, this is powerful, it's super incredible. Another thing I think that's really excited is two things before I close out is I said this earlier, but the ability to integrate with other applications. A lot of folks who are technically savvy and to kind of understand knows what that means. But here in 2022, connecting APIs and having integrations is pretty much almost like a copy paste. It doesn't really take 2 weeks of planning and a week and a half of implementing and another week of testing. You could do things pretty quick and it makes the application real powerful. And the last thing, we were talking about this in the background, hopefully there's no lawyers in here, but it's almost like, a GIS like social media platform, right? We were calling, what did we call it earlier? What was it, GeoTwitter? You know, where somebody's on their phone, you know, or, you know, mobile application or desktop, and you're able to do something. It's like posting like, you know, like a selfie or a Twitter post or a Facebook post. You're able to like do it live. For me, you know, maybe everybody in the room was like, yeah, we've been doing that for 10 years. But for me, seeing that in the federal government side of the house, I'm like, this is pretty powerful.
I just want to get GeoTwitter trending, everybody. So everybody, I know we're supposed to do FedGeoDay, but let's get Twitter trending. I can't say it. Trending today.
I'm going to go to GoDaddy right when I leave. I'm going to buy that domain right now.
Yeah,
Nobody else do that in the audience, all right? Nobody do that.
Do you think that'd be a trait? Like we could just create our own Twitter, new Twitter.
Yeah, there you go.
Geo tweeted. I don't know. Use it in the past tense. Anyway, okay. So, what do I like the best about it? Gosh, so many things. I would agree with Daryl in the community. I think it's really easy to you know, applaud the data because it's really good data. But without the community, there wouldn't be the data. And yes, we are making advances with AI and ML, and there's some really great data coming out of those processes. USA Structures is a great example of that. But you still need the person, human in the loop. You know, you need that human. And I think to that end, I think the community isn't limited in size. You know, so we've been working recently. You know, how many people know AllTrails? So that data feeds directly from OpenStreetMap. You know, and you think about a problem like that, it's like, well, if it's wrong in OpenStreetMap, somebody might go off trail. How do we fix that? We need to get them in the room, and we need to get mappers in the room. We need to bring National Park Service in the room. And, you know, that could be around any feature within the map. You're creating a new community. So now we have a new trails working group, and there's 60 people in that, and that continues to grow. So there's all these branches. So there's not just one OpenStreetMap community. There's all these different pockets. There's a lot of railroad mappers in the United States that do their own thing. There's a lot of bike mappers. So we geographically convene, but we also convene around the things that we care about and that are important to our lives. So that just, to me, creates this limitless potential of where we could go. So.
No, and I agree with that. And working with Jason, and you know, when people find out about OpenStreetMap and find out the other things could do, the Nominatum, the Overpass, all those tools, and they're just like, what? And we could do this, and like that's what we've been answering the last 2 weeks. It's just people like, can you find this out? Like, yeah, we can find it out. And there's things that people didn't even know they could use OSM for. So that next question that you have, you can answer that with OpenStreetMap. And we're going to end the panel on this. We're going to end up with some final thoughts. You can talk about whatever you want. Hopefully, it's open mapping and OpenStreetMap, right? But you can do whatever you want. So I'll go around with final thoughts there.
Final thoughts. Get involved. Join OSM. I have a couple committees that we talk about geospatial data all the time. So there are opportunities and ways to get out there and contribute, especially geospatially. It's a great community. We work together to make things better. It's a great way to spend your time. The people are fun. Probably with the exception of me. But, you know, I just get out there, get involved, and try and create value for people around you. That's all I have.
Final thoughts. I think that at FEMA, I feel like there's so much open data, OpenStreetMaps, that ways that we can leverage it. So my final thoughts would be, I would love to collaborate more with everybody, people in this room, to figure out ways we can better leverage it and at FEMA to make sure, because we have a life-saving mission, to make sure we meet that mission. And thank you guys for having me.
Give it the delay to make sure this mic is on. So I'll come out a little bit different. So as I mentioned, I'm a product manager. So what does that mean? I'm the broker between the users and the application to make things better. So I would just challenge everybody in the room who are users, whether or not you're a power user or you're just getting into it, provide feedback, right? I'll look over to Maggie. She mentioned Agile earlier and implementing, but provide feedback. See, based on your experience, folks raise their hands that they've been GIS users for the last 10 plus years. If you're new to the application, you have greater, bigger, different perspectives on how you use the application. But challenge us, challenge the team see what we could do to contribute to make the application better for the world.
Okay, I might use this opportunity to plug some things.
Go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead.
First, I'd say if you haven't ever worked with the data, go over to openstreetmap.org. All you need to create an account to edit is an email address. So go in there, maybe try mapping, even if it's just one feature. It'll really start to give you an understanding of the data structures. Second, we're having our virtual conference next weekend, Mapping USA, mappingusa.org to sign up. It's free, and it's Friday. We're going to have 4 hours of people sharing how they're using OpenStreetMap, and it's a partnership also with Wikipedia. So Wiki North America is going to be there. So it's going to be all about data. So if you're into that, I'd say join us. Saturday there's workshops. So if there's something you heard about that you want to learn, it might be taught that Saturday. We're also really excited to announce that we are a membership-based organization. We have individual members. They vote for our board members. Our board members are all volunteers. But we just expanded that to include organizational memberships. So this will be a more formal partnership with federal agencies and nonprofits and companies to start building even more of a foundation in that shared conversation. So if you're into that, come talk to me.
Okay, I want to thank this great panel for doing this, especially last moment. Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope you guys learned a lot. Please come talk to them afterwards. Ask them whatever you want. They open the door. And Jason, happy birthday again. So there you go. So thank you very much, everybody. Just talk to you guys later.
Thanks, guys.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Eric Willis, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the work we're doing at RGI on the detecting of suspicious changes in OpenStreetMaps data. So next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So this has been motivated, can you hit next? By some work at the U.S. Army Geospatial Center. So they've been looking at implementing some modernized vector tile maps that have the look and feel of more traditional CAD-RG maps like you see on the right there. So next. One of the motivations here is to avoid limdis restrictions. So they've been using some OpenStreetMaps data for that. And as you might expect, and we kind of talked about this a little bit at the panel, there are some concerns about the OpenStreetMaps data and how you can learn to trust that because it is open source. So we've devised a system to aid in the detecting of suspicious changes to OSM. Next. So this is just a brief overview of our system. It's modified from OSM CHA, which is the OSM change set analyzer, and it's deployable with Docker, so it's very kind of plug and play. We take in all of the OSM change sets from a specific day and the associated features with those change sets. And we use the OSM CHA Python library to flag any suspicious change sets. The comments, we can actually translate the comments offline into English, and all the change sets and the features are stored in a Postgres database, which we can then publish as a query layer to ArcGIS. And we've created a dashboard that I'm going to show you in a few slides that can provide some insight into these features. Next slide, please. So this is just continuing with the system overview in kind of a graphical way. We use Celery, which is a Python tasking application to obtain the change sets on a daily basis. And we run through all the steps that I just talked about. The feature services on ArcGIS do update dynamically, so every time we take in new change sets, the dashboard will update dynamically. So next slide. This is a screenshot of our dashboard, and so this is just kind of showing you what you might be able to see. On the left are the recent change sets and the comments that are linked to those change sets. You can see that there's a link that says more information, and if you click that, it will take you to OpenStreetMaps. and you can actually take a look at those change sets. On the bottom, you see we can look at the change sets per day in the AOI, as well as the top 5 users in that AOI, and this will dynamically update as you go around. One of the things that the warfighters are particularly interested in is taking a look at conflict zones. So you can see on the right we have our legend here from the ACLID database, and this will highlight specific conflict zones so we can kind of zoom in on those and see the activity that's happening there. Next. This is an example of one such conflict zone. So this is on the border of Russia and Ukraine, and we can see that there's a lot of activity going on there. This is just one example that we've kind of highlighted. You can see that the red dots here are features that have been deleted. The green dots are the features that have been added. And you can see some yellow in there, and those are just features that have been modified. So next slide. One of the things that we're really trying to look at is taking a look at biased edits in OpenStreetMap's data. And this is one such example of this over Zaporizhia, which is a city in Ukraine. And we have a specific user, I'm not sure if you can see here, but Dev Kittens, who has actually gone in and changed the name of that city to the Russian name, saying that it belongs to Russia now. And so this is a change set that we would want to flag so that the folks can take a closer look and see that we should probably take that change back. And there are some other things we can do too. So if you go to the next slide, this is an interesting case where we can look at the mapping of trenches on the border. And you can see the green polygons here, which are kind of small, are all specific trenches. But if you go to the next slide, what we can see is what we call an edit war, where there are 2 users that are kind of fighting back and forth on the course of a couple days, where we have one user who's going in and getting rid of those trenches. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see that they're being added back in. And so this is the kind of activity that we want to flag. Exactly, trench warfare, yeah. And on the right, you can see that all of these comments are highlighted in red, so we can kind of dynamically go in and search for specific keywords that we can highlight those change sets for a specific analyst to take a closer look at. Next slide. So the benefits of this interface are that it is an easy to understand kind of dashboard as opposed to just having to scroll through lists of change sets. We can set up the feature services to update dynamically, and we can start to develop some analysis tools that are very highly targeted. And it works out of the box. So the OSM CHOP project does take a lot of fiddling to get working, but since we have Dockerized this, it's very simple to plug and play. And we can integrate it with GeoServer too, if you don't have ArcGIS. Next slide. So for future work, we're looking to develop some unsupervised machine learning techniques to detect suspicious changes in geometry. So things like if a building has been moved. These are things that we can flag automatically with some clustering techniques. And we're also looking into some NLP for things like hate speech detection in the comments. And kind of going forward, we're looking to develop techniques to find patterns in those change sets. So for example, how can we programmatically flag those editing wars near conflict zones? And we can also take this tool and tailor it for specific features, like things related to the military or things like government buildings. So that's all, and thank you for your time.
In the geospatial industry, our mission is understanding the location of everything. But location isn't just about the places. It's also about the journey. The journey of how we got here. The journey of people who strive to make a difference. The journey of understanding our world through the eyes of innovation. At Project Geospatial, our stories are about the journey of where. Come check us out at www.projectgeospatial.com.
Hello, I'm Rob Pitts with New Light Technologies, and I'm going to talk for a few minutes about how open source technologies are driving mission results. This will include a look at several recent implementations of open source that are improving outcomes across large federal programs and international NGOs. The continued growth and advancement of open source software has led to a rich ecosystem of communities and technologies that are enabling organizations to keep up with the pace of change and build really creative solutions to some of our most important national and global challenges. An expanding set of open source libraries and tools are tailored for enabling the development of open science models, spatiotemporal databases, interactive 3D web applications, visualizations, and scalable platforms for sharing maps and geospatial data. Through my work at New Light Technologies, I am involved in a variety of large-scale research, development, and technology modernization projects with different federal agencies and international NGOs, where the use of open source is vital in transforming the way geospatial information is being collected and analyzed and communicated to deliver insights and mission results. For example, at the U.S. Census Bureau, we have worked with the Research and Methodology Directorate to support the production of new socioeconomic data products, including those from the Center for Economic Studies, and the development of analytical tools and dissemination platforms for the public. Here, open source technologies and software is a bedrock of the data engineering lifecycle and a growing suite of interactive web-based applications for accessing and querying and visualizing massive databases to explore the spatial and longitudinal dynamics of the American economy and workforce. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers provides vital public works, navigation, and military engineering services, including a range of digital geospatial data and tools relied on to support missions across the federal interagency community. This includes development and management of the system for distributed collection, storage, and reporting of geodetic, survey control points, tidal, and water level datums that are part of the National Spatial Reference System. Here, we worked with the Corps to modernize the survey monument archival and retrieval tool known as USmart from an on-prem technology stack to a new open source, cloud native, and serverless architecture, improving its scalability and performance while reducing maintenance costs and technical debt. The new solution, shown here, leverages modern web frameworks and open source libraries to enable federated authentication, seamless online and offline data collection for field users, and robust mapping, reporting, and 3D visualization features. At FEMA, we've been involved in supporting the Response Geospatial Office design and operationalize predictive analytics and decision support tools for disaster response and recovery operations. This includes development of an analytical framework and web platform for delivering risk assessments in real time. The Tool for Emergency Management Prioritization and Operations, or TEMPO, leverages a scalable cloud-native architecture to ingest best available data detailing the location and intensity of hazards, along with population, infrastructure, and other community information to determine areas and lifelines of highest vulnerability, impact, and cascading effects. Results are disseminated through APIs and a web-based dashboard shown here with flexible tools for searching, filtering, visualizing, and exporting information to support risk and exposure analysis, resource planning, search and rescue operations, data collection, tasking, stability tracking, and essential information for the National Response Coordination Center. Here, open source libraries facilitate a dynamic web visualizations and a highly responsive user experience. As disaster impacts rise worldwide, timely access to information related to the distribution of vulnerable populations and critical infrastructure is key for effective disaster relief. OpenStreetMap has become a vital resource for disaster mapping projects worldwide, However, large portions of the globe, including countries exposed to natural disasters, remain incompletely mapped. To address this, researchers from New Light and the World Bank developed a methodology using remotely sensed measurements to accurately predict the completeness of the OSM Building Footprints database in countries with high disaster risk. This included the development of a multivariate model using open source Python libraries that can be deployed using Jupyter Notebooks and Google Earth Engine. The model can be used to identify areas that lack OSM coverage and can help prioritize mapping efforts, especially in vulnerable areas and where current data gaps pose an obstacle to timely and evidence-based disaster risk management. So these are just a few recent examples of the great utility and versatility of open source software and how it's being used by different organizations to deliver innovative solutions for a range of use cases and missions. Open source software is vital to the development of the national spatial data infrastructure and a plethora of responsive web applications, open science models, data processing platforms, distributed high-performance computing architectures, and much more. And the growth of the open source ecosystem offers more technology and design alternatives and opportunities for the geospatial community to uncover and deliver insights to solve today's global challenges. Thank you.
Hello, she did a great job pronouncing my name. It's Leah Onoha. I am a program director at Gunnison Consulting Group and the project manager on the contract side for the Geographic Update Partnership Software, better known as GUPS. The GUPS application is used to collect geographic and attribute data from state, tribal, and local governments through 14 different programs. When beginning the GUPS program, the two key priorities were to be able to use the core functionality across all of the partnership programs and to be able to advertise the Census Bureau system as a GIS that the local governments could have free of charge for their own use forever. After heavy research, we decided to use QGIS to provide the base GIS platform. Then we developed over 54 large-scale custom features integrated into one powerful QGIS plugin called GUPS App, and extended QGIS's out-of-the-box features with other open-source GIS plugins. The resulting product included all the normal features like viewing, editing, and creating geospatial data, performing thousands of custom data quality checks, using SQLite to manage large data sets, including projects with millions of address records, and custom-developed automated topology during edge splits to ensure that all census geographic boundaries remained properly updated and in line. GUPS has been used by over 20,000 government users and is almost entirely open source, which allows us many freedoms and benefits that would be useful for other federal agency programs to consider, such as access to the source code. Having access to the source code for QGIS and the other open source technologies that we use, such as Postgres database, which we're using in our new web app, gives us an open window into how these systems work and also allows us to be able to scan the software packages for any vulnerabilities, increasing the security of our software. Also, knowing how these systems function allows us to innovate and to customize the pre-existing features the software offers, expanding their functionalities to meet our needs. The sharing mechanism that is a part of the open source community takes away the hidden nature of proprietary software. It's like a restaurant releasing the exact recipe for your favorite dish. Even though you may still go back to that restaurant to have them make it for you, you also have the freedom and the choice to be able to make that dish at home and maybe add a little bit more pepper. Another freedom that using open source has given us is the choice to use the version of the software that we want to use and to upgrade on a timeline that fits our development schedule. Of course, whenever security is an issue, upgrades should not be delayed. But we're not controlled by the ever-changing versioning that licensed software goes through. We're able to assess the technology and security advancements of each new release and schedule all necessary and desired upgrades with low risk to our development schedule. And let's be honest, the cost savings have been tremendous. We're able to benefit from and add to the free communities of support to answer the questions that anyone may have about the software that we're using. You may be surprised about the number of users that are currently taking advantage of open source. SQLite is the most used database software in the world. As the number of users have grown for open source technologies, the communities of support and the innovation has grown in stride. Do all applications perform at the same level of quality? No. But that's not just true within the open source community. That's true across all software applications. The benefit of using open source software is that we get to try it, test it, conduct thorough evaluations before ever choosing the best option for our needs. We were able to handpick the software that we use in the GUPS architecture and to create the most efficient, easy-to-use software possible for novice GIS users and advanced users alike. The outcome has been an award-winning system that turned programs that used to receive less than 50% digital responses into primary digital collections. Our federal partners, some of which are in the audience, as well as our entire team, would agree with me when I say, don't count out the open source options available to you. Thank you for your time, and I hope that these 5 minutes have encouraged you to think customized open source.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Todd Backistow with Maxar, and I serve as the general manager for SpaceNet. Next slide, please. It's a privilege to be here today to share a little bit about SpaceNet 8, our most recent SpaceNet challenge. Go ahead, next slide. SpaceNet is a collaborative open innovation initiative focused on advancing geospatial applications for machine learning. This project was founded in 2016 by InQtel's Cosmic Works Labs and Maxar. Today, it's led by Maxar as well as sponsors from AWS, IEEE GRSS, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and Topcoder. There's 4 main pillars of SpaceNet that have really been there from the beginning of the project. It was founded to provide easy access to labeled satellite imagery as training data sets. We run a series of prize challenges. The results of those prize challenges are algorithms that we open source, and then we also publish our evaluation metrics. Next slide. We've run 8 prize challenges to date. There's the SpaceNets 1 through 7 are represented on this slide. We started with building footprint extraction. We thought that was a fairly basic task, although obviously, as many in the audience know, it proves fairly complicated. We expanded by adding geographic diversity in SpaceNet 2. We then expanded into road network extraction, and then looked at some other modalities of data, including SAR, and also time series tracking data with medium resolution imagery. Next slide. So that brings us to SpaceNet 8. SpaceNet 8 was conducted from July 12th through August 23rd of this year. And the focus of SpaceNet 8 was to build on past challenges, but also introduce some novel concepts as well. So what was different with SpaceNet 8 was instead of a single class, a feature class to extract of buildings or roads, this was a multi-class segmentation problem where you had to extract both buildings and roads. But there were some additional layers of complexity. This was the first challenge where we used pre- and post-event imagery. And so the infrastructure was extracted from the pre-event imagery. We then looked at post-event imagery for flooding to determine which parts of that infrastructure were affected by the flooding, and contestants had to identify that. The data sets were from the Maxar Open Data Program, so it's the same type of imagery that a user would access in the case of a natural disaster. And this was featured as part of the CVPR 2022 Earth Vision Workshop. There were $50,000 of total prizes that were awarded as well to the top 5 teams. Next slide. This shows a little bit more detail on the data sets and the evaluation metrics. So building on prior challenges, we used similar metrics, so intersection over union for the building footprints. We also used a metric that In-Q-Tel had developed called the average path length similarity, or APPLES metric, for the road network extraction, and then we looked at the flood attributes as well. All of these were composed into a single score, which you'll see on the next slide. Go ahead, next slide. So SpaceNet 8, as I mentioned, concluded on August 23rd. There were 292 registrants on Topcoder. Of those registrants, there were 36 submissions that were valid scores, and there was over 1,000 submissions. So they can actually submit multiple times, and then the best score counts. So what you'll see is that for other challenges, like all the other challenges, we publish a baseline algorithm. That score was in about 44 out of 100, and the top scores were about at least 20 points higher than that. So some quick observations from SpaceNet 8. We have some papers and other blog posts that will share the solutions in more detail. But we noticed that data augmentation was used to improve the data diversity as well as the model adaptability. And this was both from past SpaceNet challenges as well as from other referenceable sources where the licenses were appropriate and allowed for that. There was pre-processing to address realistic data issues from pre- and post-event type of imagery. There were also neural network ensembles that were used, and the UNets were the dominant architecture, which is also the architecture that we used for the baseline that was developed by Oak Ridge. And then also for post-event, for post-processing, there was actually some thresholds that were implemented to avoid false positives. Next slide. So if you're interested in SpaceNet 8 or other challenges or want to get involved with future challenges, come talk to me after this. And you can also visit our website, spacenet.ai. You can see both the AWS, the repo for the data, and then you can follow us on social media as well. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Lexi Yam. I am part of the Geospatial Science and Human Security Division at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I'm here to present the USS Structures Database, which is the first baseline structure inventory with several critical attributions for the US and its territories. This project has been supported by my wonderful team members, including Taylor, Eric, Ben, Matt, and Jessica. The motivations of building this data set is to respond to the need of having accurate, most updated structure information with consistent quality across US in the events of natural disaster response. Such data set is critical for federal and local emergency responders to prepare, respond, and mitigate right after disasters. We kicked off this project around 2017, and by last year, December, in addition to the structures mapped out from high-resolution satellite images, the dataset also has a consistent metadata and scheme across all states. In some cities, whenever data are available, we also incorporated some LiDAR-derived structures. In order to prepare us future maintaining and updating the datasets, we also assigned a unique building identifier, UUID, to track the changes happened at structure level. The datasets can be downloaded via this URL or scan this QR code. As the pilot study, we also provide the occupancy types and primary occupancy for 9 priority states. This is the overview of the workflow we developed to build this dataset, starting with curating and pre-processing high-resolution satellite images, and then creating in-house labels, capture structures, and those labels are needed in building a convolutional neural network to map out those structures in images. Annotations and the labels were only needed at the earlier stage of this project. At the later stage of the CNN model development, we leveraged the 59,000 labels to create a robust and generalizable structure mapping model, and then really needed additional labels to create such convolutional neural network models to map out structures. Such a convolutional neural network model was trained and deployed on high-performance computing clusters to process terabytes of high-resolution satellite images. And several steps of post-processing and verification and validation process were followed to produce the base structure footprints. The verification and validation process were performed both automatically and manually to ensure the quality. Mapping the base structures in images is just the first critical step. We then work on populating critical attributions by leveraging several key data sources, including census housing unit data, high-field open data, Lightbox parcel data. We also developed a machine learning modeling approach to fill data gaps where there was no data source is available. This is the current schema where green-colored attributions are included in the current open data sets. That is available through the URL I mentioned before. The yellow ones are the additional attributions that we are currently working on and expecting to have the dataset updates before the summer next year. Here are some examples of rapid disaster response efforts USS structures has supported. From wildfire, lava flows, hurricanes, this dataset has become a critical component in FEMA's disaster preparedness and response efforts. Our goal is to continue to refine these datasets and provide richer attributions on structures to continue to improve FEMA's ability to respond both quickly and efficiently. We are currently focusing on these tasks. With the 9 priority states, we had seen the benefits of having occupancy class and primary occupancy attribution in disaster response. So we are working on populating these 2 attributions for the remaining states. We are also working on stand up a workflow to extract elevation-related information from other geospatial data sources, including LiDAR and ground photos. In particular, LiDAR, the 3-depth data, has the potential to provide elevation information, such as building heights, highest adjacent grade elevation, and lowest adjacent grade elevation. As an example, these are the extracted structure heights derived from 3-depth LiDAR data over New Orleans. Most importantly, we would like to hear users' thoughts and experiences to help us improve these datasets. Those can be other open data sources that we can leverage, or some of the key attributions that we are currently missing in these datasets. However, they are critical in your applications. Thank you for listening. If you have any thoughts, any suggestions, you can reach me at this email address, And again, you can download this data set from this URL. Thank you.
I'm Josh Lieberman from the Open Geospatial Consortium, and I want to talk to you a bit about what Open Geospatial Consortium is and what we're doing in the area of disaster information and why openness is the essential component of that. So, next slide. So the OGC is a consortium of 550 plus organizations, commercial, government, academic, and many of you may know of it as an international standards organization. Its mission is fair spatial data, the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And as you might be thinking here in this audience, open is a very important part of that. Open data, open standards, open interfaces, and where that sharing is to do with tools and development, it's also open source. However, the functions that OGC has go way beyond standards. In fact, OGC is kind of a laser printer. We do a lot of things, and occasionally we spit out a piece of paper with a standard on it. We do outreach. We're a global forum for the geospatial community. We connect people. It's a thought leadership. And a very important part of what we do is innovation. Next slide. So the innovation program runs all sorts of activities around standards, and I separate them into kind of pre-sales and post-sales. The first thing we need to do is imagine what a standard could be used for, and if it's a standard for collaboration, we need to collaborate to try it out and to come up with that. So we have Imagineering programs, test beds, pilots, engineering services, interoperability experiments. Those lead to negotiations over what would be a good standard. We do a standard, we have the web map service or an OGC API, but then how do you use it? And so another phase of innovation is pilot activities where we imagine and prototype and educate and reach out. How can organizations and people benefit from sharing geospatial information with these standards? So it's the process around the standards that makes them really valuable. Next slide. So one of the focuses we've had in terms of the value of spatial data sharing is disasters. And here's just an example of the widespread area and time and severity of disasters. This was in 2020, but the important thing is that they occur over a range of spatial and temporal scales and interact with each other. So in many ways, the ones that we need to work most to alleviate are the ones that are least visible and yet most effective in affecting the things that are visible. And so it's information, and it's shared information. It's the right information to the right person at the right time. That makes a difference in achieving good outcomes with these situations. Next slide. So we've had a series of pilots. Ooh, next slide. There we go. We've had a series of pilots, the last one in 2021, looking at how can we get information in the right form, at the right time, to the right person, in the right place, and particularly getting those eyes on the sky to really be effective for those on the ground, to rapidly integrate, process, and transform. That word analysis-ready data is in there, but we also have another term, decision-ready indicators, going from what we observe of the Earth to what you need to do about it. And the whole purpose of this is to spend more of our time addressing disasters, risks, and vulnerabilities, and less time playing with data. as much fun as that is. Next slide. So here's the kind of an open ecosystem paradigm that we've been working towards in these activities, where we have analysis-ready data from many sources, but we're trying to go from what we see to how to act. And that transformation is essentially, very essentially, quintessentially collaborative. The providers of that data don't know what they're needed for. The users of that data don't know what's available and how they can use it. So coming together along this chain of value from data to action is the way that this data is valuable and usable in the actions and decisions that are needed in disaster situations. Now, this is sort of looking along an angle. Next slide. My time is up. Okay. Next slide. Disaster Pilot 2023 coming up. See the CFP in February and hope to see you there.
Arch Grants was the first source of funding. There's a whole wealth of investments that are coming from the St. Louis area, and it's only continuing to grow.
Arch Grants offers a number of mentors and companies that can help ramp up our business and grow quickly in the Midwest.
Today has created an opportunity for so many people, so many layoffs, so many things going on. Now is the time for people to create their business and scale on the other side.
When we received the grant in 2014, we had 5 employees, 6 employees, and now we're at about 20.
Arch Grants proved to be the perfect partner for us and have catalyzed our growth and get us to the next level.
Arch Grants awards up to $100,000 in equity-free grants.
At Arch Grants, we fund innovative, diverse, early-stage companies with the potential to scale and make an impact in St. Louis, the country, and the world.
Join the movement. Join us here in St. Louis.
Apply today at Arch Grants.
Hi, my name's Allison Schaefer, and I'm a supervisory geographer in the Geography Division at the U.S. Census Bureau. And my team is responsible for making sure our metadata is created and complies with the standards set in our various acts. So, like many other agencies, the Census Bureau has been working hard to keep up and on top of the various mandates such as the Geospatial Data Act and the Open Government Data Act. And we've been working on implementing new ways of working, new processes, and making sure our products and metadata are meeting the standards required by these acts so that our data is findable and usable for our users. Since many agencies are impacted by similar endeavors right now, I wanted to kind of share what the Census Bureau's been working on and our next steps, and then kind of open the door for collaboration. I think that we could probably benefit from working together to learn about different trials and tribulations people have gone through, and to learn how to implement these solutions and keep on top of them. Okay. So actually, can you go back 2 slides? Okay, perfect. So our recent accomplishments, the Census Bureau has recently incorporated standards complying with the Federal Geographic Data Committee technical guidance. And we were working to get these standards in software development requirements so that we could automate our metadata creation process. We create metadata for over 30,000 different files that we publish as part of our Tigerline metadata and Tigerline shapefile products that go out. So it's kind of, it's a very intense process of making sure, all of those files are correct. We've also been working towards automating our metadata quality control. So before the files actually get published, we want to make sure that they're pristine, and we've worked to finalize a quality control process using open source tools and Python to be able to conduct that quality control in a more streamlined, automated fashion. Next slide. So our next steps are to ensure compliance with various mandates. Right now, we want to make sure that we're putting our data out in the formats that are specified by data.gov and by the Geospatial Data Act. And we also want to make sure that we're following the standards that are the latest that are recommended by these agencies. We plan to expand our metadata creation for additional products. So right now, like I said, we only are producing metadata for our Tigerline shapefiles, but there are other geospatial data products that the Census Bureau publishes, and we want to be able to provide the best information about those data so that our users can use the data to their best ability. And then finally, we want to work on enhancing our metadata quality control process. So, implementing more automation, implementing more state-of-the-art methods that we might be able to use for this quality control. Next slide. So with that, like I said, I think probably I'm not the only one going through this, and there are other agencies that have been working on identifying standards and going through similar processes. So I'm interested in connecting with folks that are working on these endeavors, learning from each other's challenges, and learning from each other's successes and solutions that we've implemented, and then sharing that knowledge. So please feel free to contact me. I'll be here at the social event, and if you have questions or want to exchange contact information, I'd be more than happy to, and I'm really excited to start picking each other's brains and learning from each other. Thanks.
We love St. Louis not only because it's home, but because it's a great place to live, work, and play. And we think it'll be critical in attracting top talent.
We don't have to look outside of St. Louis to find good talent.
There is no other city in the country that you can scale a business in like St. Louis. The access to resources, the price point of the media market today has created an opportunity for so many people.
There's a number of incredible brands here in St. Louis. A number of resources has made talent attraction and company building, and so St. Louis was the right fit.
I feel like there's a different kind of loyalty, a different kind of culture here that people have.
Arch Grants awards up to $100,000 in equity-free grants.
At Arch Grants, we fund innovative, diverse, early-stage companies with the potential to scale and make an impact in St. Louis, the country, and the world.
Join the movement. Join us here in St. Louis.
Apply
talk all day. I'm Ryan Burley with GeoSolutions. GeoSolutions provides enterprise support services, professional training, and custom development for open source projects such as GeoServer, GeoNode, and MapStore. We are comprised of the core developers and core contributors for these products and highly involved in interoperability standards such as WMS, WCS, WFS, WPS, and others. With us here today, all the way from Italy, our founder and CEO of GeoSolutions, Simone Giannichini, GeoNode technical lead and solutions architect, Giovanni Allegri, and winner of the prestigious Soul Cats Award for free open source software in GIS, technical lead Andrea Eim. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, GeoSolutions is a member of USGIF, OSGeo, and OGC. We participate in OGC Innovation Program testbeds as well as the Disaster Pilot 21 initiative, and we're currently participating in the Census Opportunity Project. Next slide, please. In recent years, GeoSolutions has had over 200 customers globally, primarily concentrated in Europe and North America, and all levels of government and industry work in applications such as maritime security and vessel tracking, earth observation, emergency response, drone-based wildfire mapping, evacuation mapping, high-definition mapping for autonomous vehicle navigation, precision agriculture, smart cities, and other applications requiring massive amounts of spatiotemporal data, both raster and vector, which is our specialty. Next slide, please. On that note, we're honored to share the stage today with our customer and business partner, Masego. In addition to doing great things in the human geography space, Masego is leveraging GeoNode and OSM data, as well as GNOME, as part of their new geospatial data mining platform, Insight. With that, I'd like to introduce Masego's CTO, Andrew Kerr.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So as a quick way of introduction, a little audience participation, everybody in this room has heard of OpenStreetMaps. That was one of the questions asked earlier. How many folks in the room have used Overpass Turbo or are aware of what that is? Okay, a few folks throughout the audience. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about Insight, which is a geospatial data mining tool that we built along with our partners at GeoSolutions that kind of combines the best-in-class geospatial content management system that GeoNode represents, which is GeoSolutions' flagship product, and some of the best-in-class features from OpenStreetMaps and from Overpass Turbo to kind of bring it all together and create a data mining tool that we're trying to make a lot easier for the average analyst, your average novice GIS user, or non-GIS user to be able to pull out and use large amounts of geospatial information without having to have necessarily all the requisite background and training to get there. So as a little bit of a background, a lot of you guys will already know this, but OSM and the topographic data in it works at any scale from a building to a continent. So you can, the database is continuous, it's spread across the entire thing, and it's seamless, which is kind of a nice advantage versus a lot of traditional data sources. I'm going to speed through this presentation because this is a 30-minute presentation for folks who are not familiar with OSM. So a lot of this stuff you guys will already know, and I don't have a 30-minute window to do this. So next slide, please. So we are, as I mentioned earlier, this is a tool that's built on top of OSM. So OSM has been mentioned today. I looked it up a few weeks ago. So OSM has 9.2 million registered users, 8.9 billion unique objects, and 4 million edits made to the data set every single day. And so in addition to that, GeoNode, the primary product of GeoSolutions, is a geospatial content management system. It's flexible. It avoids a lot of the vendor lock-in and cost issues that are common with traditional Esri customers and ArcGIS Online customers. So it kind of provides all the features and functionality that folks have come to expect out of from using ArcGIS Online, but in an open source and in a flexible capacity. NSG GNOME, so for those folks who are involved in that part of the federal government space, GNOME is a program run by NGA that kind of is a DoD clone of GNOME they run internally. So this program is intended to run both on OSM and on GNOME, so to kind of work for customers who are behind that federal government or classified environment firewall, and for those folks who are working OSM and for the rest of the world. And for Overpass API, for those folks who have not used or are not familiar with Overpass API, it's the backbone of the Insight tool that we were building. And to quote the OSM Wikipedia article about it, acts as a database over the web. You can search for location, object type, tag, property, proximity, or any number of combinations of tags. So what does that mean? On a practical level, how is that helpful? So we had a conversation recently with some folks over the FBI, and they asked the same question. Why do we care? How is this applicable to us? And the scenario we gave to them is, imagine you get a cell phone video that has had the metadata scraped, so it doesn't have location information in it, but you've got a video of somebody threatening to shoot up a school or blow something up. And you can see behind them in the video that they are next to a park, a 7-Eleven, and a bus stop, and they're somewhere in the greater DC area. And traditionally, if you've got a matter of minutes to get police onto the streets to try and find this person and you don't know where in the city they are, this would take a large team of people going through a lot of data, and in order to get it done in 10 minutes might not be feasible. It's a lot of information, it's a lot of work to go through. So using Overpass API and using the OSM database, you can search for 7-Elevens that are in within a few a 10-meter proximity of a park, a bus stop, whatever you're looking for. So you can give it kind of complicated geospatial queries where you would previously need to pull in data from a lot of different places all at the same time. You need to have an analyst who's able to pull it down, open it up, analyze it. It's a process that everybody in this room is pretty familiar with, but it takes time. And if you've got a shortage of time, or if you don't juggle on-demand retail data, so you don't know where all the 7-Elevens are, it gets cumbersome. It's where OSM really steps in, and really the live database, the collaborative nature, really benefits folks and really kind of makes this a real leap forward. Next slide, please. So as kind of a summary, GeoNode offers a central location. I apologize. Okay. Thank you, everybody. we'll wrap it up with that.
Hey, our table's right over there if you want to talk more.
Yeah, and if you can skip to the last slide, it has our contact information if you guys want to get in touch with us. Yep, there we are. Thank you for your time.